All right, we began. Come on, come
Hello.
all to the philosopher tier ranking video that we did before. Or no, we did several like this, but the audio
Yeah.
was not recorded on my end. However, this
Yeah.
time around it will be, and
Yep.
we're gonna have a Cinco de Mayo, well, a Seis de
Yes.
Mayo technically, um, philosophy tier ranking production episode.
Awesome.
Kind of like a lecture, kind of like a podcast episode. Yeah, I mean we have a healthy list here of about 50 or so philosophers from all up and down the centuries, many of whom are modern, postmodern, some of whom are more Enlightenment, and a fair amount are Renaissance, medieval, and ancient. So, really, you get all the Western and a few Eastern mystics, but all the Western talent on this list.
Yes.
And for some reason, you even get the funny, people like Fyodor Dostoevsky, right?
Huh.
You know, maybe not technically a philosopher, but he certainly has a
Yeah.
philosophical um, facade and intention.
Yeah,
Um,
certainly.
okay, so first on the list we have groundbreaking is the highest rank, and then it's
Yeah.
influential to multiple schools, and then it just goes straight to good from, and then which is basically the nice version of mid, and then a, a notch below that you have little influence or mediocre, which is I feel like a lot of these characters are going to go there.
Yeah.
That's just my guess. And bad is the next one down, which is
Hmm.
starting to get pretty insulting. Terrible is the one below that, and it's about as horrible as about as terrible as it gets, as bad as it gets. And then don't know is the lowest one, which I whoever made this list, keep in mind as a caveat, like we didn't make this list, we just kind of
Yeah.
respected it enough. Out of all the philosopher tier ranking lists, this one seemed like the most suitable for what we're going to do. And the,
Yeah.
the one on the bottom of the list called "Don't Know" seem it's they have these on all these lists, and it's like I don't care if it's "Don't Know." I'm just gonna leave it out in the pile.
Hmm.
I'm not gonna like
Yeah.
ascribe a list to it. So
Yeah.
or a ranking, I mean. So it's I don't know. Without rambling further, even if I like to ramble, without rambling too much, we should get started.
Yeah. And can I also request you share your screen to me on Discord
Yeah.
so I can see for myself?
Yes.
Awesome.
Um,
Nice.
it is shared.
Here we go.
Oh, you can change the background colors and stuff. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think you can change the names too.
Okay, I'll do that right away. Do
Cool. Yeah, that's true. True blue.
true blue. Oh, and then I'm sorting. How did I do? What? How did that?
Oh yeah, somehow that one got dragged up. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Huh.
There are buttons that are obscured because on my computer hides certain colors. My computer is like colorblind.
Oh. Oh, weird.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, you really figured that out quick. I would have been stumped for a while on that one.
Okay. All
All
right.
right.
Up. Okay. So who do you want to pick? It's you get to pick because you're the guest.
I kind of thank you. I kind of oh, I see what you were saying about the inversion. That's kind of crazy. I think we should go from just because I feel like they're already kind of random. So let's start in the upper left with Diogenes. I think that is a guy in a barrel, right?
Dang. Okay. Yeah. This one was one in the last philosophy one I did. The first one I ever did.
Yeah.
This we
Okay.
got. It took a while to get down to Diogenes because it was the
Yeah.
punk rock philosophers, and we
Oh,
were
cool.
assessing how punk rock the philosophers were. But for whatever
Yeah.
reason, Diogenes was like going to be the most punk rock. But he
Definitely.
was like, for
Hell yeah.
whatever reason, he was like towards the very end
Huh.
of the list or whatever.
Saving the
So
best for last.
yeah. Anyway, so
But yeah.
what would you say for Diogenes? First, the first thing you should know about Diogenes is that he's relatively obscure and relatively uninfluential, even in his own time. He is a
Yeah.
skeptic, But he wasn't a Pyrrhonian skeptic. No, no, he was a cynic, wasn't he?
Yeah, cynic,
And
exactly.
he's sort of the godfather of cynicism. He really wasn't a philosopher's philosopher. He was
Yeah,
more of like a joke philosopher, like one that people like.
yeah,
He was designed to, I think, from by academics and scholastics to make philosophers look cool on occasion.
yeah.
And so he was basically just like a homeless person that was very proud of being homeless, and he'd always defend it. His like for his entire career as a homeless person, he was this radical sort of
That's
free
so funny
thinker.
when I put it.
Just lived off. There's one anecdote where there's a
Yeah,
tyrant in the town, of
mm,
course, and then one of the Greek city state, I forget what it was, but a friend of his visits Diogenes. He's like, Diogenes, you're cooking lentils, but if you just sucked
mm,
up to the tyrant, you would not have to eat lentils.
mm.
And then his friend says, well, um, because I choose to eat lentils, that means I don't have to suck up to the tyrant.
Yeah,
And so for him, negative things were positive because
yeah, and also, yeah,
because it meant that he didn't have to work and slave away to get a glean of happiness or self satisfaction or false achievement or whatever. So in a way,
yeah,
he's an anti-philosopher because he doesn't really stand for middle class morality. I think a lot of philosophers
yeah,
are effectively middle class in their orientation,
yeah.
except for Marx for some reason. But most of them are middle class in their orientation, and
Hmm,
Diogenes was just emphatically not like that.
hmm.
He was basically a
Yeah,
caveman, right?
yeah, exactly. I mean, even by the standards of antiquity, he was primitive, sort of. I mean, that's what cynic comes from the word for dog. Because Diogenes and his followers lived basically like animals. I feel like I feel like he almost like gets a bad rap in my mind because like redditors really love him and like people kind of expect philosophy to be very boring and then they hear these sort of
He's a miscreant.
and
Very,
yeah, and he's
very
actually
punk
he's
rock.
kind of like yeah, he's like a proto hippie,
Yeah.
proto hippie kind of like this unwashed grungy, punk guy thousands of years before his time. And there's something cool about that, which I'm like, yeah. So I shouldn't be too down on him. But I would say, I agree. He doesn't really stand for anything. And
Oh,
someone said that he
oh,
yeah.
hold on. Am I sharing my? Hold on. Am I recording myself? Tap here. Oh yeah, I am
Uh
recording myself. So I'll sit up. 'Cause
okay.
in such case, um, yeah,
All
yeah.
right.
So there's a okay, and then
Yeah, so I'd call him like yeah, I would still call him bad though. Someone said that he was like a Socrates gone mad, which is kind of cool. Like he certainly has his place in the history of philosophy, but he's also kind of annoying and he's a bad example because he's just this kind of I mean,
the
that
famous.
anecdote about the yeah.
I think the most famous story for him is sort of a story, another story that kind of proves him wrong, which is Alexander the Great. Stopped by his town and
Yeah.
paid him a visit, and he was like, "Hey, can you get out of the sun? You're blocking my
Yeah.
sunbathing." And
Yeah.
Alexander was like, "Wow, this guy's rude to me, Alexander the Great. Huh? If I were anyone but myself, I'd want to be this guy because he has balls, right?" And but that's almost like a story that's supposed to, it's ostensibly promotes Diogenes, but I think it actually underwrites him because it or undermines him because it makes him look
Yeah.
like he just doesn't care about anything, and it's rather sad. Um,
Dang.
totally detached, right? I think there is a solipsistic sort of camp
Yeah.
that we're about to delve into, and we're gonna find a
Mm.
lot of philosophers that are more like Diogenes than they would probably care to admit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the dog man, the troglodyte, where do we put him? You say
I'd
bad,
say I'd say bad.
bad, squarely bad. Yeah, I agree. I think that green
Yeah.
square for bad is right there with Diogenes. He's kind of a badass, but he's a bad badass who's kind of double negates himself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh
Next on the
okay.
down the pipe.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, but like the way we're doing this is you choose one, I choose one sort of.
I was hoping you could choose them because
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
you're
Yeah,
the
because you
guest.
got the call inversion. I would just go like one by one, kind of autistically, but like granted, I don't know who that guy is. I don't know who the guy on the upper left is. The guy to his right though is Plato, so we could just skip. Let's just make that guy don't know to the left of Plato.
Yeah, for now, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that's like dimly recognizable. I just don't.
And then yeah, and then we can do Plato, or I
Okay,
think
let's
that's
put
Aristotle.
Plato in terrible just to keep him in the dugout or the batting lane or whatever. And
Well, no, let's do Plato. I choose Plato.
didn't I just pick Plato?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so we're doing Plato.
Oh, like while we pre-rank him. I thought you
Yeah,
meant
we're
like
pre-ranking him
okay,
by putting him in terrible,
okay.
just as the holding cell. And then yeah, so for
Yeah, no,
Plato,
that's his
people will
underground
say
prison.
that Aristotle was smarter. His pupil, his disciple is in his error. But I
Yeah.
think Aristotle was rather unintuitive about politics and rather unintuitive
Yeah.
about sort of social dynamics.
Hmm.
And this is reflected by his surviving corpus. And so Plato was a more grounded and personality in some ways. I think he was very
Hmm.
much aware of what the perceptions of his writings would signal. And in some degree, this is likely informed by the death of his master Socrates, the
Hmm.
maestro. And I think Plato had this unusual sensitivity to what people would think of his writing style, of what he wrote about. And
Hmm.
so he was able to write dialogues that were very kind of clear cut in what they were intending
Hmm.
to signal, almost like really well written advertisement or
Huh.
TV commercial pop jingles that just they play to a certain theme in the psyche and then they don't really go beyond that. And there's an
Yeah.
elegance to that. There's a beauty, but I think more than anything, he was doing it to avoid censorship and opprobrium. I
Uh-huh.
think Plato really was kind of writing into the theme that he was cutting into it, not just writing into it. He was cutting into
Hmm.
what topics he needed to address and the points he needed to carry across. So
Yeah.
for me, Plato is very high in this ranking. I think he was one of the most sensitive to his reputation of the philosophers. Not
Yeah.
only that, he was a groundbreaking foundational philosopher, probably the most foundational. Um,
Yeah.
and he established the major philosophical school in Athens that would influence
Yeah.
all subsequent schools, even in the wider Mediterranean. So while he may not have his ideas on their literary value may not always be amazing. Sometimes they're rather annoying. I do think that, especially in the Republic, I do think that a lot of his literary ideas um, decorate his philosophy very well and give him a sort of
Hmm.
an august personage that would otherwise not really be there for any philosopher. So he was able to kind of create a world unto himself more than any other philosopher in his own lifetime.
Hmm.
Because of his literary sensibility. Uh, I
Hmm.
beyond that, I mean, his actual ideas on their own moral, ethical merit, let's say, or on their own metaphysical or epistemological merit, I would say that they're um they're not really fully formed in the Aristotelian, satisfactory sort of
Hmm.
saturation that we look for. However, that was because Aristotle was obsessed with outpacing his master. So
Hmm.
it's a hindsight sees 2020 effect. I think
Yeah.
Plato, before Aristotle is considered, was a very astute ethicist and a very astute metaphysician.
Hmm.
And beyond that, I don't really know what arguments could be said to the contrary. I
Yeah.
think it's sort of undeniable.
Yeah. I agree. I hadn't really realized that, but for the one thing, I think your point about the aesthetic value of his like images and stuff, I really agree. That's like, so I think Aristotle ironically said that like a gift of metaphor is like a sign of genius. And you're right, Plato isn't always, amazing, but then he's frequently amazing. So yeah, but more than that, you're right. He's not as systematic or cohesive. of like a system builder as Aristotle. He certainly is more than Socrates, but I mean, he's so foundational. It's like, you know, philosophy really begins with him even more than with Socrates.
Yeah, and I would say you can put him in groundbreaking. I don't think Hegel famously
Yeah.
opined that all philosophy has been a footnote to Plato. Um,
Mm.
I think there are people who could also say that about Hegel, and so it's sort of a little tinge of irony there. But
That's funny. Yeah.
Plato, for the most part, he was able to. I think, like, beyond his immediate influence in the academic, in his own academy and then the subsequent academies, I think he was also very much influential in Christianity and the formation of Christian theology, like
Yeah.
Aristotle is as a reflection, as a mirror to that.
Yeah.
However, I think the Plato was exceedingly brave in a way because his ideas on their. Sure, I'll take one chocolate. Yeah, yeah. I ate
Hmm.
half of it, and I didn't want to eat the other half. Oh, that's fine. Thank you. Enjoy. Take care.
Nice.
You got a Twix.
Awesome.
And so with Plato, yeah, I mean, he's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
I think he should be everyone's favorites. And I think he writes in a human voice. He doesn't write like as a grandstander like
Mm.
Confucius.
Wow.
And
That's a
that
great
that to
point.
me is a sign of self-awareness, and a lot of philosophers could learn from that.
That's
Everything he
great.
did had some sort of virtue ascribed to it or ascribable to it, and
Mm.
for every deficit there was a strength in his character. And I think so much of the Western tradition is modeled after that, and I think the Neoplatonists were spot on in citing using him as an inspiration for their system
Hmm.
rather than Aristotle. And I think they really helped create Christianity as the strong religion that it has turned into. So if you
Hmm.
care about the world religions, Plato is kind of as important as anyone in the
Yeah.
formation of a major world religion. So yeah, I
Yeah.
put him in groundbreaking without a shadow of doubt.
Yeah. I agree. It's one of those guys who gets it so right that it's like, so it's that thing about the footnote. Like he like draws the boundaries of things and.
Okay,
All right. So let's go to Jean Baudrillard, the guy next to the mysterious guy in the upper left.
this one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's Baudrillard.
All right.
So what do you think?
Great writer, uh, exceptionally readable, um, pessimistic, um, sometimes perhaps even hypocritical.
Hmm.
But for the most part, he's really a kind of an astute observationalist. I don't
Huh.
think he really has a comprehensive network of of new novel ideas. I don't think he really is operating with his own symphony, of
Hmm.
ideas. But I do think his orchestra, let's say. But I do think a lot of what he wrote about, a lot of his social commentary was, maybe it was kind of like the type of thing you'd read in like a magazine. It was very
Huh.
like it was like food critics in its tone,
Bit shallow, it
a
sounds
bit
like.
shallow. I do think
Yeah.
that he was that kind of hurts his reputation, but he's not the only one like that. A lot of his contemporaries were like that.
Yeah.
I also think that taking that, brushing that aside, his notion of the simulacrum was really may not have been influential, at the lower levels in society, but it was a very serviceable idea, workable. I don't
Hmm.
think we can really deny him that, and I think that it's a great word to turn to, even if it is derived from antiquity. It is he was able to sort of move it into a space for permanent operation for just about any serious thinker and writer. So
Mm.
I would say he's good. I would say maybe bordering on little influenced mediocre.
Yeah, I would. I'd say like I don't know. I'd say he's between bad and little influence mediocre, just because like
Okay.
I kind of disagree. Like I find that his writing style is like it's this like French syndrome, especially among like critical theorists or whatever, where like there's it just it I find it obnoxious. Like they refuse to be clear, like beyond what is even beyond what is necessary. Like obviously when you're expressing a new idea, a really radically a new idea, you're gonna have to be a little bit obtuse, kind of. It will sound a little obtuse, but like there's just this sense of poserism, which is annoying because like I see it even in thinkers that have good ideas. Like his idea of the simulacrum is like very true, and he's picking up on something new in our world. But like I mean, at least I haven't read that much of him, but I read like one of his later works, and it was just like it's just a logjam. It just becomes like unintelligible. And I
Yeah,
find that like kind of disturbing.
he's rather critical of every environment you can throw him into. He's critical of Santa Cruz, California. He's critical of New York City. He's critical of
Yeah,
Europe as such. He's critical of kind of anything in the modern in the '90s or whatever whenever he was writing the most, and he early 2000s, let's say, and he has this problem of sort of being the best of the amongst the worst. I think that shallow
yeah,
group of French sort of critical theorists is, it risks being this sort of monstrosity of pseudo intellectual pabulum. But
yeah,
I do think, despite no matter how pabulous it is, it's very true. I've heard recently that French literature has declined so much because critical theory
mm,
has become so popular and French cinema has become so popular.
huh,
So I think in an alchemical sense, this critical theoretical writing it signifies some sort of continuation of the French haute couture.
mm,
So
yeah,
haute couture, right? However you want to say it. So I don't. My admiration for French culture sort of has led me bias. If I weren't a
I see.
Francophile on a few levels, I probably would
Yeah,
just say he was bad or little
okay,
influenced. But
yeah,
because you're saying that he's borderline bad, little influence, and I'm saying he's borderline
yeah,
good, little influence, I'll just compromise with you and put him in little influence, mediocre,
yeah. That
mediocre
sounds good. Split.
philosopher. But you know what? We are kind of
Split the
tainted
difference.
because he has a legacy. He died recently, right? Relatively
Yeah,
recently.
it's true.
So
Yeah,
we have to
it
kind
may be
of
too
look at
soon to
him.
tell.
We kind of pedestalize him, I suppose.
Yeah,
All right, up
or
next,
failed it. Well, we could. I kind of want to keep to the same scheme, but that's kind of boring, I guess. I mean,
you want to do Albert? This who's really boring to talk about. I struggled with this on my last one.
yeah,
Is Albert
Camus.
Camus? So maybe we should just get it out of the way.
Yeah, this is like the very beginning of the French syndrome. Like, I mean, not really, because his ideas are actually, he's actually his writing style is clear. His ideas are very clear. Uh, like painfully clear. I remember I used to think that he was right, but it's just one of those philosophies that doesn't really. It's kind of like noble in a frustrated way, but it doesn't work. It would only work for him and for like a certain small subset of people. It's kind of almost like he's the inverted Kierkegaard in that like he's very noble in a certain way, but it doesn't quite. It's almost like he's more ethical than a good philosopher. He's just like an interesting person, in my opinion.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean Albert Camus, right, is Algerian French writer from died in the 40s. Very
Hmm.
famously friends with Jean Paul
Sartre.
Sartre and I believe um,
Probably, yeah.
Beauvoir, Simone Beauvoir, and in his writings, he wrote several, mostly novels. In this, but I think he's probably even more famous for the Myth of Sisyphus,
Yeah.
which, as a sort of this iconic story, he kind of has probably the most popular philosophical essay in North America, maybe even the English speaking world, maybe even the Western world. So the myth of
Wow.
Sisyphus is an extraordinarily popular
I didn't know it was that popular.
pedagogical tale that in his exact rendition of it is was published in schools or for scholastic textbooks.
Huh.
I don't necessarily think that makes him a good philosopher, but I do think it explains why he's so well known. Also, his stories um, in his novel length stories are usually pretty interesting. I think the
Mm.
one that's the most readable is obviously the
The
what's the name of the
stranger.
one? Not the plague,
The stranger.
the stranger. Yeah,
Yeah,
the
that's
plague is
popular.
an interesting premise, but I think the stranger is the most readable one. It's the spiffiest, and
Yeah.
he's more of a literary gentleman in my estimation than a actual like blue blooded tried and true philosopher. Even for modern philosophy, I think he doesn't really fit the bill.
Yeah.
I think even critical theorists would look at him as sort of a joke.
Mm.
Um, but um, I would say don't know because I don't really consider him a philosopher. I think he's sort of a shoe in that's designation of sort of an adolescent misapprehension of philosophy, possibly even a sophomoric pseudo intellectual attempt at philosophy. But I don't really think he
Dang.
represents it in a any kind of academic situation.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. He's basically not a real philosopher. Yeah,
Okay,
I kind of
I'll put him
agree.
in don't know because I don't want to rag on the guy for other
Yeah.
people misattributing his works.
Yeah, a category error, right?
Categorically,
Um.
yeah, categorically flawed. Yeah. Okay, well, let
So
me grab my charger. It'll take less than a
yeah.
minute. Okay.
All right. And I'll let me look up. Let me look up who that guy is while you're here. I want to see that first guy. Is it? Uh, oh, that must be Marcus Aurelius. Yeah, that's Marcus Aurelius. Okay. A lot of these guys I don't know. I hope you're still listening, wonderful audience. You're not snoozing or falling asleep to the dulcet tones of my. Yeah, glad I could figure that one out. I guess.
All right. Well, I'm back in the
Yeah.
saddle again, folks.
All right. Cool. Hey, I figured out who that first one is. By the way, I googled it.
Oh, great. Reverse? Did
That's
you reverse
Marcus.
image search?
No, I
Okay.
just looked up Greco-Roman busts and I got lucky. That's Marcus Aurelius,
Is it really?
Stoic.
It doesn't
Yeah.
look like it.
Oh, the top of his head's cut
Well, let's
off.
do him
I'm
next
all.
then, because just to get him out of the don't know category.
Yeah, exactly.
All
So,
right.
what do you think?
Marcus
Stoicism.
Aurelius is um a Stoic disciple. He was a general, of course, and an emperor, and he was kind of known for being a methodical ruler and very because of the Stoic philosophy that he embraced, which was kind of unusual for an emperor to do. He was
Mhm.
probably the only one to do it very successfully. Because he embraced this philosophy, he he was a kind of considered like a prudent and prudish and priggish kind of guy. Like he was probably not the best person to hang around with. Um, so in terms of but it made him a very diligent commander and organizer and administrator. Um, I don't necessarily think his own philosophical writings are anything more than glorified self-help for like entrepreneurs and so on. If you read
Yeah.
what he writes, a lot of it is it's not pabulum, but it's like how to lose weight in 10 days kind of level. A lot of it is like
Mm.
how to get sleep an hour less a night and still get things
Yeah.
done. He kind of
Yeah.
writes at this sort of productivity junkie kind of
Mm.
tone. However, there is a sprinkled in a fair amount of like folksy sort of Confucius like wisdom because he was a man of antiquity. So he's going
Huh.
to be thinking in terms of spirits quite often.
Oh,
Um,
that's
so the
interesting.
stylistically, he's rather annoying, but I think his actual insights are kind of rivaling some of the ancient Greeks. You know, like his actual insights are kind of like it's all kind of formatted in this. By the way, he wrote in ancient Greek because that was sort of the expected educated language. So his meditations was is sort of like a almost like a diary written in ancient Greek by a man who didn't really speak ancient Greek; he spoke Latin,
Huh.
and I think it's a very profound work because it was written by someone at the highest possible level of society. You
Hmm.
know, there's no other book is really like that.
That's
There's
interesting.
no other
Yeah.
like how to live the best life type of book written by the number one dude in the world or in the Western world. There's no other book
Hmm.
like that. But that said, it becomes sort of this compendious, like kind of eccentric book where every different he talks about all these different little things because
Yeah.
his mind is a little bit scattered in his responsibilities. Um,
Huh.
he's got a lot of aphorisms and even well known quotes, but from what I remember, they're not extremely different from who am I getting at? He's kind of like in between a Cicero and a Confucius in the gravity of the way he writes. He, he
Huh.
he writes sort of towards like a middle class audience, but then he also has these kind of like immortal truths that he drop truth bombs that he'll drop. But from what I can would have digged up when I've done my deep dives into Marcus Aurelius, he never really you never really get the sense that you're getting rocked. You never get the sense that you're getting
Hmm.
like you're sorry. I don't know. Like do you know what I mean? Like I feel like
Yeah.
Marcus Aurelius is not like a heavyweight. He's not really like hitting the home runs. Like he's kind of like
Yeah.
his ideas aren't very systematic. They're kind of based on folk spirituality. Um, he's sort of like the pinnacle of Stoicism in the material sense, but he's also kind of the death knell of Stoicism because he was the
Hmm.
last famous Stoic philosopher.
Hmm.
And his ideas are kind of muddled, and they're not necessary. There's a lot in them, but they're not like you would have to take the time to sort of spell out all of it in a way that would, and it would be hard to wrap it into a framework. It wouldn't be that easy.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think he really is a great systemizer of ideas. So maybe he has sort of the talent to be a good philosopher, but I don't know if his execution was is really that praiseworthy.
Yeah.
Like he's a little bit like a Joe Rogan type.
Yeah. I mean, I feel the same way. Like I feel like he was kind of. I mean, there's a weird sense in which certain philosophers are like damned by their audience. I mean, it's kind of
Damned
dumb for
and
me to be.
hardly delivered. I just
Yeah.
what would you rank him as? Good? Maybe good.
Uh, I mean, I'm pretty harsh. I just put him bad because, like, I mean, admittedly, I read only a small bit of the meditations like a long time ago, so there's probably more in them than I'm giving them credit for. But it's just Stoicism is one of those frameworks of life that, like, I can never really get a handle on. Like, I don't really get. I can't really grasp it. To
Okay,
me, it
so
seems like
despite his like kind of overwrought ambitiousness, you think that he's mediocre. Let's probably put him in mediocre, little influence.
yeah, I feel like Stoicism is
I
just
mean,
like
this
this
is the
kind of
proof. The proof is in the pudding with Marcus. I think his son Commodus, his adopted son, or whatever,
oh yeah,
was
exactly.
one
I
of the
was gonna
worst
say that.
emperors ever. So if his book was so great, surely his son would have
Yeah,
read it and taken after his father, took after his
yeah,
father, in more ways than one. But he was an outright failure,
yeah,
an out and out failure, and
yeah,
so it's a very good read, but it really is. It's one book, not so that tells you something already. He wasn't really in the business of writing, and then it comes off as sort of like a self glorifying self help manual,
yeah.
which is sort of cringy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. I agree. So that
Okay, we
next
have
guy is
who's up next? Michel Foucault.
well no, the guy before him is Nick Land, and he's terrible. He's one of these like people that just writes gibberish. It's like a very
Is he an
like
academic?
stage yeah, it's like a stage 4 kind of theory cancer where like it's just
Jeez.
cringe. It's like really embarrassing to see someone write something that I don't. It's just painful. That's terrible, and I would put Foucault under terrible as well for
Well, let's
different reasons.
let's go to Foucault. Okay, Nick Land. I
In
don't
his own
know
time,
personally, but if you're saying terrible, then
yeah,
I'll just let it ride.
let it ride. Yeah,
Foucault, I do think tries to be systematic. I do think
yeah, definitely he does.
he has some pseudo profound observations, and then a lot less. He has some actually profound observations.
Yeah,
I think his problem was that he was sort of crippled by his addiction to ideas that only impressed us like a strident minority of of intellectuals, where his like
yeah,
he didn't really have the broad brush appeal, the broad stroke
hmm,
appeal that like a really serious philosopher would have. Um,
huh,
and I would, and I think you know how it is, and then I think Foucault is his histories of sexuality are kind of what he's most known for, and he's very interested in the way punishment sort of traumatizes people. He's kind of veering
yeah,
off of the psychoanalytic tradition and
yeah,
trying to be he's trying to be a sociologist of sort of variant of
yeah,
psychoanalysis, which I totally respect. But I think the way he did it was kind of it's kind of uh, I would say redundant. That's my main. I think he's a more interesting read than he is a philosopher.
hmm,
But I think when you have someone like Freud, and then maybe Jung or Adler, and then you also later on get like a person like Lacan, someone like
hmm,
Foucault is he's playing the same songs, but he's like playing them in reverse. And to
hmm.
me, that just adds to like this web of confusion that's largely unnecessary in my life. Um, but I do
That's
think that
pretty
his
funny. Yeah,
writings are very interesting, but they're interesting in sort of an ironical sense. I don't think they should be taken too
huh,
seriously. They kind of come off as sort of whimsical.
huh.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I yeah. That's actually a good point that he does the kind of psychoanalytic culture critique from like the opposite end of the like soft sciences spectrum sort of, which does have like some kind of theoretical advantage and probably even the practical advantage. I mean, again, there's this kind of like malice and snideness and pride, and maybe I'm just imputing it unfairly, but like I really often sense in these theory guys, and it just rubs me the wrong way. But setting that aside and looking at the content, of the ideas, I just feel like sometimes like his stuff is just like it's already all there in like Marx or even Nietzsche. So like I don't get what like I don't really know what he brings to the table. I mean, you're right that he does. He's almost like an interesting historian who examines things through a certain lens, and that yields certain truths. So maybe I've been too hard on him.
he's a
I don't know.
thematic historian, but he's not rigorous, and he doesn't describe himself as really a historian. And
Yeah.
he's so fraught with mistakes and inaccuracies that
Hmm.
it's almost like even like a high school history buff would find his writings problematic as a historical
Well,
text.
that's pretty bad then. I
Yeah.
mean,
So he's sophomoric. He's the definition of sophomoric. But I do think if you have nothing better to read, he's pretty good. Like it's pretty
okay.
largely because he's so crazy. You know.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, we could put him mediocre, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to say he's probably as influential as Marcus Aurelius in the long haul.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's all up in the academia right now. I kind of think something like that,
Well,
sort of.
there's this joke that like, people that want to show off that they've been to grad school will talk about Foucault.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what you're studying. Just anyone who wants to show off that they've been to grad school, just talks
just
about
bring it up.
brings up
Yeah,
Foucault.
that's funny.
Yeah.
I don't know who those two guys are, so we can. I don't know
They
them.
look like they look like these sort of AI toadies. They just talk all the time about VR and like the digital revolution, and they're
Well, the
basically
second guy does. The first guy, come on, he looks like a rip off Tolkien or something. He does. He's got the pipe. The is that the jacket?
JBB
Yeah.
Hemmingson.
Gonsheim. Yeah. Who the
Godshine.
frick
That was
is
a good one. All right, well,
who
I'll
is
put him
this
in don't
guy?
know because these people definitely have they have minor characteritis. They look like NPCs.
They look like character actors. You're so right about the AI toady. Like that's so funny. That's like exactly what he is.
There's a
That's
well,
Al.
I'm hoping
Yeah,
there's not too many of those on this list because I tend to
that
filter them
guy's
out.
Alvin Simmons, the AI researcher and theorist. Okay, I know that guy though. That's Julius Evola, the traditionalist, conservative
Okay.
guy.
I know next
King
to nothing about
stuff.
him. I know that like
Yeah,
he was like a formulator of some sort of conservative doctrine that was I
yeah.
think is kind of laughable because like I said
Uh,
like it's
oh,
redundant, right? Like it's a conservative redundancy, but I don't know. Maybe you know way more about it than I do.
yeah.
What do you think?
I don't know that much. I also you cut out. Can you? Sorry. Can you just say it again?
Maybe you know
You
way
cut
more
out.
about him than I do because I consider him sort of this like he's redundant in a way that's totally different from Foucault, but I think
Yeah.
like you're saying like a mid-century philosopher that's really into conservatism is nothing that hasn't been done before. So
Well, that's actually a good point. That he is kind of like the opposite of Foucault, sort of. But that makes him equally obnoxious. I mean, I haven't read that much of him, but I know he
he's politically the
was.
opposite of Foucault.
Yeah, but he was like a traditionalist. But the kind of error in traditionalism, in my view, is like it's kind of silly to just revere tradition for tradition's sake. The idea is that tradition is valuable because it preserves some ancient truth, not because. And this whole like these people who lionize aristocrats, like he did with his aristocrats of the spirit, they're always invariably like not aristocrats. Like he reminds me of Roger Scruton or whatever,
Oh yeah,
except like much worse because Roger Scruton has like the comfortable, like overstuffed English chair comfiness about him.
yeah.
And Julius Evola is just like kind of a simpering little fascist. I mean, look at him. He looks like a little weasel.
He does seem
Unfortunately,
fascistic. Um,
yeah.
I
I
will
mean, I'm
say,
not,
I will say
yeah.
though that these are good comparisons with the Roger Scruton or whatever that guy. But
Yeah.
I think that even then, you can re-aestheticize him in the
Yeah.
name of because he's Latino. You can or whatever it is,
Well, no, he was Italian.
Italian. Or even more to my point, he's like he's. I
Yeah.
think I think it takes a lot of strength to recognize the value in sort of quaint simplicity and modesty of character and habit. I think
Yeah,
someone
maybe
like
too
Julius
harsh.
Evola, it could be a paragon of sort of maybe a Catholic leaning philosophy that's secular.
Mm. Mm. Yeah,
Um,
I agree.
but
I
I
think
don't
so.
think as like an academic, he's you would call that brilliant. But I do think that morally he's onto something. So I think he
Yeah,
can't be that bad. Maybe I'll put him in good, the low end of good.
yeah, yeah. I agree. That's good.
Like
I
if,
can go
you, if
with
you're
that.
playing it safe in terms of morals, has never really been a bad move. So
Yeah,
anyone who's trying to remind people to do that and can do it with a voice that is
resonant.
non-religious, I think is accomplishing something.
Yeah.
But I don't,
All
I don't,
right.
I don't think he's very influential. I just think
No.
that he kind of represents a good writer in a way.
Mm.
But I don't think he like I don't mean to say that he's like everyone's top influence. I'm just saying that I think he represents
Yeah.
sort of middle class morality very well.
Yeah. All right. So now
I
we
mean, I
got
mean,
Petrarch.
the conservative
Oh, sorry.
aspect of middle class morality, traditionalist.
Yeah.
Petrarch. Well, this guy,
Not
Francesco
really a philosopher.
Petrarca, right?
I don't think.
He, I
He's a
wouldn't
poet,
really call him a
right?
philosopher. I think this is another one that's kind of like they're sort of like shooing him in because they're running out of names to drop at the cocktail lounge. So they're like, oh, Francesco Petrarca,
That's so funny.
this guy was famous for writing sonnets and a few
Yeah,
essays on literary and archaeological criticism or what have you. He was
yeah,
kind of a philologist in some ways, but he was also
yeah.
kind of your standard Italian poet. But in the what 1300s, 1200s,
Something
1300s.
like that.
Yeah, I mean, he came after Dante. He was known, like, if you don't know this, you should know this. He was kind of known for like ushering in the Renaissance with his
Yeah,
trumpeting it in. He was very
very proto Renaissance
very
guy, I
proto
think.
Renaissance. We've talked about this before. He would walk up a mountain just
Yeah,
for the feeling the pleasure it would give him, which I believe at the
yeah,
time was considered eccentric to go on a hike.
yeah,
So he kind of
yeah,
invented hiking in the
yeah.
intellectual history, but I don't really know. I don't believe that. I don't think he invented hiking, and I also think he's just sort of like he's basically a translator. I mean, he was lucky enough to get a hold of some Byzantine documents, and I think
Uh-huh.
if I'm not mistaken, he translated them, and Cicero's works he translated, I
Mhm.
think, and as
That would
well.
sort of make sense if he's at the dawn of the Renaissance,
And
sort of.
so he was
I
kind
don't
of
know about
like
that.
a classicist translator that was
Yeah,
also a very good poet and was and was amongst the was hobnobbing in the Hoyer Stoy. I There's not really a lot to break down about him. He's pretty traditional. Speaking of traditional, this guy is not that remarkable as a free thinker. So, but I don't think it's his fault. I think people just sort of
yeah,
expect too much from him.
yeah.
He's a very middle of the road personality. Let's say
That's pretty funny. Damn, that's pretty accurate. I think you're kind of right. I just don't know. He's not actually a philosopher. We know
he's
him, but we
not
don't know
really
if
a
he's.
philosopher. I mean, you could extract some
Yeah,
sort of philosophical system
yeah.
if you read into his work really well, but like, unless you're on a shit ton of meth, you're probably never going to do that. So yeah, I,
That's great. Yeah, and even then, I mean, I can. I don't know. Even then. All right, the next
maybe it
guy.
might be a good PhD
Oh,
dissertation. I don't know. Anyway,
yeah, yeah. That could be another way you would go down that rabbit hole. And honestly, he probably did write some like little treatise. I mean, that sounds insulting, but
okay,
um.
he's
So
written some stuff. We have to dig him out.
yeah,
I know Dante did. Wrote political philosophy. Of course, Machiavelli would be. That's all he wrote pretty much. Um,
mm,
yeah, but Petrarca he was kind of more of a lifestyle guy. So
yeah.
lifestyle coupled with a very serious interest in the classics for their invigorating value. Anyway, we should move on. Here, let's
So
look
the
it up.
next,
Let's look it up. I don't
okay.
want to throw him under the bus. So maybe he is a philosopher.
Yeah,
Maybe we're
I
missing.
know you got to be sympathetic to Petrarch, right? Yeah, I mean he's described as a scholar and poet.
Yeah, he's
Okay,
historically
translate
important
it.
because he rediscovered Cicero's letters, like I said,
Yeah, yeah,
um, and he set a model for his style of Italian poetry. So,
yeah. That's
um,
it's enough to be a poet. You don't have to be a philosopher
you
too,
kind
like
of
he
you're
is.
kind of right. Like you don't
I
have to
think
be
being
a
a poet
philosopher.
is better, to be honest, in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong.
He wrote about Laura. I mean, anyone who's
Yeah,
writing,
he was kind of a simp, to be
he was
honest.
a
But it was a
simp.
new thing, so it's forgivable.
He
So
invented being a simp. That's what he did.
yeah, he literally
His
did.
contribution to the Western intellectual tradition. Okay,
Hmm.
who up next?
That guy is. I had to Google it because I mixed him up with Schelling. That guy is Fichte or
Oh,
Fichte.
yeah, yeah. I like Fichte. I totally
So he's
forgot.
like a sort of proto Hegelian, I
He
think,
was the
even
guy
more
that
so
came
than
up
Schelling.
with the thesis,
Uh,
antithesis, synthesis.
yeah,
Yeah, Hegel didn't actually come up with that. He just
mm,
kind of stole it from Fichte. But Fichte meant it in a way that was like sort of like less grandiloquent, or whatever. He meant it in a way that was,
yeah,
I don't really know. Like he's not like a common read or anything, but relatively obscure. But I would say Fichte is influential to many schools, but he's
Yeah.
sort of like he's a technical philosopher in a way. He's sort of
Mm,
someone that we inadvertently rely on, but not someone that we read as an exemplar.
hmm. Yeah, I don't. I kind of agree. He's very influential. I feel like there was this kind of wave breaking in German idealism, and it really broke with Hegel. But it did begin with Schelling and Fichte. But I just honestly I have no idea what his theories or ideas were. But I would bet a lot that they're basically like a proto Hegelian kind of like a run up to Hegel, sort of.
Well, he was like a constant collaborator, is my understanding.
Uh,
Um, uh,
I mean,
and the German nationalists quite liked him.
mm,
Let's look at the Wikipedia article with minimal citations. Um,
mm.
do 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 do. Okay, Schopenhauer says Fichte,
Schopenhauer, yeah,
this is what he says about Fichte. Fichte,
yeah,
because the thing in itself had just been discredited, at once prepared a system without anything in itself. So consequently, he rejected the assumption of anything that was not through and through merely our representation, and therefore let the knowing subject be all in all, or at any rate, produce everything from its own resources.
yeah.
So that. What that means is
Says it all.
that
Yeah,
says that what that means is he developed the very conceptual tool that
yeah,
all the Hegelians end up using, and that means
yeah,
everyone who is influenced by Hegel effectively is influenced by Fichte, and
yeah.
he was like the when there's Voltaire, there's Diderot, or when there's Diderot, there's D'Alembert. There's always someone in the background doing the legwork, and you're just sort of like, well,
Yeah,
does he really have a personality? Okay,
sort of setting the stage. Yeah,
you sort of see, yeah, he set the stage. Literally, he was the stage decorator for the Hegel's, maudlin vaudeville performance. So
that's fucking crazy. That's great. Yeah,
I
he's
think
the
him almost like
Kabuki
an
no
Engels
actor.
type, but Engels actually probably had more
Yeah,
personality. Okay.
yeah. Okay, that is John Duns Scotus, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, this guy is influential. I just don't remember his whole theology because it's sort of neither here nor there. Um,
Well, the thing about yeah, I mean the thing about other scholastics outside of Aquinas is that this was a very stable time in intellectual history in my opinion. So like you're not going to get people with like crazy ideas. They're going to there's going to be a broad form good faith agreement and people will like disagree about weird little things that are like most normal people can't care about or understand. But unlike later in the history of philosophy, like it is possible to kind of explain them to the
I know he's
layperson.
like a farmer. Like he has the philosophical breadth of like a farmer. It really is kind of like a dyed in the wool medieval man, and it's sad because I that
Well,
everyone's going to
yeah,
overlook him for that reason. I'm trying to remember, and it's all theological too. Like it's in
yeah,
back then, everyone who was a philosopher was a medieval scholastic, and they were monastic
yeah,
scholastic,
yeah,
and they were um, inextricably linked to Trinitarian values. And basically,
yeah,
it was all sentential logic that they had to do in Latin,
mm,
perhaps, and then they would just
yeah,
kind of, very, like you said, very rarely make sort of a weird modification to an already weird doctrine,
yeah,
and that would be kind of the name of their career.
yeah. I mean, yeah, I agree. Like again, people agreed so much that like I feel like a lot of modern philosophy is people trying to be like more edgy than the next guy. Like you can definitely smell that with like Foucault and all the French people. Like they're trying to make you be like, "What? Can you say that?" Like, "Oh, I can't believe he just said that." Like, and that could not be further from the scholastics. The one thing I do remember about him though, is that he came up with this idea of the formal distinction, which is a kind of distinction between. I mean, already it's like your eyes glaze over. A distinction between a real distinction and a merely what is it? Like a distinction which is merely virtual or something. I don't know. So obviously that's why it's called like the subtle doctor because that's like a pretty subtle concept. But I've actually heard people try to use that concept of the formal distinction to reconcile to
Yeah.
reconcile the Eastern and Western theological sort of lines of thought
Chasm.
on the nature of the Trinity.
Okay.
Just because like both cultures come at it from different angles, and like if you're not careful, then each side will accuse the other of being either polytheists or excessively like denying the Trinity. So it's but it's very in the weeds, but it's sort of, in my opinion, this is a sign of a great philosopher, that he's not. You don't have to like rock the boat, you know. If you push knowledge a little bit further,
Yeah,
and I can
he
see
kind of
that.
feels like a
Yeah.
Van Orton Quine kind of guy or whatever.
Mm. And he came up with the Immaculate Conception, so that's pretty darn important for
Did he really
Catholics
come
at
up with the
least.
Immaculate Conception?
I think he defined it
No.
or something. I don't know. Well, look, it says it there. I just remember they've said about that. Like Aquinas didn't believe in it. Oh no, okay.
No,
He
defended
defended
it.
it.
He defended it, and
Okay.
that's the other thing about these medieval scholastics is they would like
Yeah.
defend things because there would be
Yeah.
trends that were like in this depopulated Europe, at this time they would have like these
Yeah.
monks like arguing against things
Yeah.
that were in fashion for like hundreds of years, and then they would have to have
Yeah.
like these like courtroom procedures where they would like it was all like they were all debating like
Yeah.
they were splitting hairs and letting flies fuck each other, and it was like I don't know, man.
Angels dancing on the head
Angels
of a pin.
dancing on the head.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. That is. I mean, I want to give him props just for being a scholastic, but that's biased. He's not even influential. Can I call him good? Is he good at
Yeah,
least?
he's good.
Yeah, he's good in the sense of like, oh, that was good. He's good in a very like basic Aristotelian sense.
I don't know. This guy reminds me of one of those. He's sort of like he's just sort of a personality in some ways. Like he reminds me of one of the Roman senators who like had some famous speech, but he never really got any good policies made.
Yeah, it's like he's good. He just never really did anything that groundbreaking, I
Well,
guess.
you know who the modern version of him would be Alfred North Whitehead,
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know much about
like a very
him.
luminary figure, but like also just sort of like
Not
big,
really many
kind of
big
like big
ideas.
fucking deal. Like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
process philosophy. Well, we'll get to him. We'll get to him. Up next is
Yeah.
someone that we all know. I've actually had a very, very minor correspondence with this man.
Yeah, I remember you told me
I've had maybe four
years ago.
four email exchanges with him.
Yeah.
Um, and he's very much alive, but not really.
Well, somewhat alive.
Oh, he's mildly alive. Noam Chomsky.
Colorless green Chomsky's live deadly. Okay. Stupid. All right. What do you think?
Well, I think I think what he did with linguistics was pretty groundbreaking.
Yeah.
I think his political outlook for many decades after the fact were really good. I think he has an uncompromising sort of criticism of the American war machine and the American empire, and I think that like he doesn't really veer from that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
He's not
It's a bit
sentimental
static.
about America. I think he's kind of just sort of like an anti-American guy,
Yeah. Yeah.
radical.
Yeah.
I think he's a little bit of like a. He's more of a dilettante than people will acknowledge. I think he doesn't. He seems really really smart, and he is really really smart. But he's also like he's not like an expert at every field that he talks about. He'll just sort of like give like fast and quick opinions on things that he doesn't really have like a lot of background in, and that's a
Mhm.
little like disturbing or like unnerving or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's also
Yeah.
like he's not the best public speaker. Like he's pretty boring to hear him talk, and he's kind of
Mhm.
like a lionized, idolized personality or has been.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think he's dumb. Like I think he's very logical. In the way he talks, he's methodical almost every turn of the sentence. But I just think he's kind of robotic, and I think he gives kind of robotic answers to complex questions.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. So
I think
sort
I
of
think being
lack.
at MIT for all those years has sort of fried his brain, honestly.
Jeez. Yeah, it could be. I don't know much about him besides the language theory, and even that is like I don't know.
There's an anecdote. Well, he doesn't like Israel, which is relatable to somewhat. But he also he has anecdotes about when he's a pacifist and he's an
Yeah,
anarchist, but he doesn't seem
yeah,
to really live those lives, at least not anarchy. And then when the nuclear bomb hit Nagasaki or whatever, or Hiroshima,
yeah.
he read it in the news and he was at a summer camp and he walked off into the woods and was he couldn't even he was freaking out alone because he didn't understand how anyone could do that, how anyone could bomb a whole place. And so he was
Wow,
like a really sensitive person.
that's pretty good. I like that. That sort of argues against him being robotic. It's very
Yeah, but it's just I don't know. It just seems sort of
authentic.
I don't know. I can't get a read on the guy. I think he kind of I don't know. I think he wants to be a robot. I honestly think he wants to be a robot. So I don't know.
Huh?
I mean, he doesn't have a sense of humor. It's just sort
Yeah,
of.
that's pretty bad.
He did say some interesting stuff in his interviews or whatever. Some of his they say they say he's written over 100 books, but most of the books that constitute that are probably compilations or they're interviews and not really him writing them. Um, but he said, but he has written a lot of books, and he said in one of his interviews that he knew someone that was his uncle was a magazine salesman, at a magazine's outdoor, what do they call them, a magazine stand. When he was
Yeah.
growing up, his uncle did that, and he always felt like his for whatever reason he got this had this hunch that his uncle was more educated than anyone he knew, and he felt
Mm,
like his uncle was more educated than any teacher or professor he ever met.
weird.
And that's also kind of a very kind of humanizing sort of anecdote. But I just think with someone like Noam Chomsky having these 1940s anecdotes, after 60 years, it's not really that charming. I think he does kind of
Yeah.
lean towards being a robot. I think being at MIT has made him not really mind the fact. Um, at one point he criticized the University of California school systems. By the way, he was like,
Mm.
he said he went to Mexico and he thought the schools there were really good. Happy Cinco de Mayo, and then he went to
Yeah.
California and he on the same tour and he thought the California schools were really really terrible. The UCs.
Mm.
And I sent him an email asking him what he meant by that, and he said he had no recollection of saying that,
That's weird.
which is weird because that's a pretty heavy-handed thing to say about
Yeah.
an entire school. So the guy's he's kind of shifty. I don't know. In my own personal experience, I found him to be kind of shifty. Um, and I also think that his views don't really have any serious originality. It seems like sort of a compend. He seems like he sort of has he just kind of has the average liberal kind of view on most things.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. It's like the average view, only more so. I mean, outside of the universal grammar thing, that's certainly a novel idea. I think maybe
Yeah,
I
but
don't
the
know.
universal grammar thing was almost just like a free will versus determinism, hard
Uh,
determinism argument, but it was on different terms. So
yeah. So he's not that original then. I know what you mean. There's a lot of that's what I was saying about Foucault to some extent. That it's I don't get why this isn't just Nietzsche kind of.
you know what it is he's very. I just think he's like a celebrity. Like I think he's really good at self promoting.
Yeah.
And America is such a
Yeah.
celebrity culture that someone like Noam
Yeah.
Chomsky is just he really good at self promoting. He says what he needs to say to have credibility, and then it's kind of empty after that.
Yeah. So you want to make it bad?
Because this is the thing is that most people who look for advice from a philosopher, they're dealing with kind of like rudimentary questions And
Yeah.
they just want like a name that is like a thing that's important. They don't really want like they're like they don't want some like professor to tell them something. They want to go and get like the biggest name guy to tell them something. So they're going to buy a book by
Correct.
someone who seems famous. And
Yeah.
that's America, is like the celebrity obsession where it's like I want my problems solved by a demigod. I don't want my problems to be solved by someone
A
humble. I want
normal person.
because there's no
Yeah.
religion. We make religions out of weird stuff like women's bodies, and we make religions out of fake politeness in certain people. It's like
Oh
we
man,
worship weird qualities that other societies don't worship that much. So I think
that's
Noam
great.
Chomsky is kind of fallen into the sausage grinder a little. Um,
Dang.
I will say little influence, mediocre.
All right.
Because that universal
Okay.
grammar thing just seems like a big fucking deal. Like, okay, I never understood why anyone cared.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree. Okay, so the winsome Max Stirner, the
This guy,
solipsist
this
egoist.
guy is what do you call it? This guy's a narcissist. This
Yeah, he
guy,
is.
this guy is like he wants recognition so badly that
Mm,
he wrote a philosophy that says that you can't do philosophy because a person's own inner thoughts and feelings are so undeniably complex that you could never really understand them.
hmm,
Maybe
I
not
didn't know that.
even understand them yourself um, for yourself. So I think this guy has some sort of chip on his shoulder about the very process of philosophy, the very examinations of philosophy. I think Max Stirner wants to sort of destroy philosophy and
Mm,
sort of take credit for being the one to do it. Um, and that to me seems like a fundamental narcissism that is
mm,
kind of it doesn't really it goes against everything that philosophy is about, which is its own scientific self preservation, and also the the simple fact that Max Stirner is wrong. I think we have to talk about him. His whole thesis, I think, is very wrong. It's not. It's obvious. It's just on its face stupid. But he's kind of singing this song for himself that is a tearjerker, and it makes you be like, oh well, maybe he has a point because the way he feels is so intense. No, maybe he doesn't have a point. Maybe he's just crazy. Maybe he's just conniving. Maybe it's all a
yeah,
manipulative game. Like I
yeah.
I don't know. Like I understand why he seems like a guy who didn't like philosophy, trying to write a philosophical text just to confuse people and confute some grand hypothesis that was
Mm,
popular, which is, of course, that philosophy matters. And
mm,
in his own time in the 1800s, someone who was trying to make a name for themselves in philosophy, it wasn't that easy because you actually had to understand what you're reading.
mm,
And I think a guy like this, he barely understood what he was reading, and so he just decided, not for me. I think it's
mm.
all dumb. I think it's all hopeless, and that's what I'm going to write about.
Jeez.
And so for me, that's pretty bad. So I'm going to put him at terrible.
Yeah. Well, I actually don't really remember what his philosophy was,
The
but that
Ego and
sounds.
its own. That was the book. It's not called.
Yeah.
It's I don't know if it's called egoism. There's like a word for it now.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, it's enough to say it's narcissistic, which is like I don't know,
Well,
toxic,
what it is
anti-intellectual, I guess.
he will destroy everything in the philosophical engine of society, like the whole engine that is the philosophy as a literary genre, the philosophy
Yeah.
as an entity. He wants to dismantle it for his own like self promotion, and the way he does it is by just deciding that philosophy is pointless and that he's the one who gets to point it out and make money off of it by selling books. So
Yeah.
I think I think what's easy to look at this guy and be like, well, this guy is he has a point and he's an intellectual, But you have to remember, even in the 1800s, people were writing books to make money. Like this guy wasn't Marx. He wasn't trying to like revamp society. He was trying to
Yeah.
dismantle the very process of philosophy for his
Mm,
own self glorification.
mm,
And I think the crazy part is I think he actually thought he was noble for doing that. I don't think he really was willing to acknowledge that he was just at wit's end and was kind of trying to destroy something very beautiful and important for his
mm.
own snide sort of masturbation, mental
Jeez.
masturbation, right?
Yeah.
So what? Yeah, I don't
Well,
know.
that doesn't. Yeah.
What? Yeah, what are you saying?
Doesn't keep him from being the terrible sloth, though.
That puts him. I
Because
think he's the worst philosopher you could find.
dang,
And I think it's actually impressive. I mean, narcissism.
he's that
Yeah,
bad.
I think
Yeah.
I think I think his reputation is bolstered by the dint of that. So,
Jeez.
who's up next? Let me go to the restroom.
Yeah, I have to as well.
All
So,
right, good
all right,
timing.
can we pause it or something? Can we pause the recording, or do we
No,
just?
let's just go real quick.
Okay. Maybe we'll take turns, huh? So I can just
Yeah, go for it.
talk to people so they're not bored. All right. So these five people, I don't remember. I don't know who they are. That first guy, when he's color swapped back to normal, is maybe No, he's not Tertullian. He doesn't have the bishop's robes. Justin Martyr. I don't know. I don't know who that cheeky Romanian Eastern European looking man is. That third guy, I think, is Abelard, I believe. Abelard statue. Could it be Abelard? Yeah, that's a weird depiction of Abelard, but that's him. Um, well, let's just see portraits of church fathers, because that looks like from a compendium of ancients. Let's see. These are all icons, not the actual portraits. Ah, do do.
All right. Well, I'm gonna make some
Yeah.
tea while you can go to the bathroom.
All right, I'll keep going.
No, you go to
I
the
don't want
bathroom.
to.
I'm gonna make tea. I'll talk while I do it.
You will. Okay, I'll be back in a
I
second.
love this apartment. This apartment is like um, I have a hard time decorating the walls because I'm actually really terrified of peeling off the drywall layered or the painted drywall or whatever. But like the paints, I guess, and then the drywall is under it. I don't know. Drywall is something that like peels off, but I know it's like flimsy material. What I will say is that this apartment is nice though. It's like a shotgun apartment. You walk in and then you turn left, and the whole apartment's down to the left through past the hallway. And right now, I'm just going to make some sencha tea for myself so I can stay chipper and have I kind of want to brush my teeth and maybe rinse my mouth out so I can talk more. I'm a little bit of a germaphobe these days, living in the trenches of New York City, and also COVID is still a factor. I don't really like touching my hands with my tongue, but um, so I'm a little deranged, is what I'm trying to tell you. Anyway, I'm gonna make some sencha. Sencha is like a green tea from Japan. It's grown a lot in the north part, but it's also kind of a lot, but it's also grown all over. I think it's one of the lower priced teas, but it's still good value. It kind of has a distinctive flavor as you'd expect from a tea, but it's the flavor I think is a little too sharp and piquant for me. It's a little the notes are a little too um, I don't know uneven. I kind of wish I had more of like a
Hmm.
an oolong tea or something, or a pu'er,
What
something
kind
a
of tea is
little.
that? I just got
This
here.
is sencha. It's a Japanese sencha.
Oh
Out
yeah,
here they have these wonderful Japanese grocery
tea
stores
too.
where they're like pretty sizable small grocery stores. They're kind of small, but
Yeah.
they're the size of a normal New York City grocery store, and
Hmm.
they're it's all Japanese stuff, all imported,
Huh.
and they make sushi there
Pretty cool.
too. They make all sorts of meals. Like I think they make
Wow.
salads and fried chicken and stuff. Japanese, of course, yakitori or whatever. And but you can get tea there too. So I got some tea.
Oh, sounds nice. Yeah, I got some tea from Taco Bell.
Shut
Not quite the
up.
same.
What does that even mean?
I did. I'm not lying.
Okay, well, while we're talking about Taco Bell,
Yeah.
you're plugging Taco Bell. I want to plug my the movie I made. So that
What?
everyone go. It's in theaters now. It's called The Green
Wait, what is that?
Berets, and it was directed
Oh.
by John Wayne, and I produced it. And you can pick it up at Barnes and Noble for $5. So
Wow.
straight to DVD.
Are you gonna make money off that? Patrick?
Well, we're thinking that the first one we'll just do at a loss, so that we
Oh,
can
a loss
promote it.
leader, yeah.
And then the one we do next couple of years, we already have the contract signed, right? So the next couple of years we'll do
Yeah.
the second one, and then that one will make a lot of money because the publicity will already be extant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Loss leader.
The lawsuit? No, well,
No, loss leader. Like
loss
that's what
leader,
they
yeah,
call
and
it.
also we will sue you if you don't buy it. So just keep that in mind. Class action lawsuit.
Nice.
Well, I guess it's the reverse. It's the company against the people, whatever that means.
Oh yeah.
I don't know how that works exactly, but we'll do that.
Company action. Yeah. We'll manage somehow.
We'll sue the entire populace, and we'll establish a
Great.
tax that pays just for the movie. Okay. Stamp
I like
tax.
that. Of all the random, yeah. If you're gonna be mailing stuff willy nilly, you better get Green Berets.
Oh, that's not what
What
it
are you
did.
doing now?
Oh, so get this: a stamp tax is not. Or am I thinking of a poll tax? I might be thinking of a poll tax. But no, it's a stamp tax. I don't know. Apparently, a stamp tax was not limited to like USPS stamps or like Pony Express
Oh.
stamps. A stamp tax was whenever they stamped any legal document. So it was a tax on legal
Oh.
documents, and it still exists.
Oh wow.
Like when a
That
lawyer
makes sense.
sells a house, that
Yeah.
or that legal document is stamped, and there's a stamp tax
Yeah.
that goes to DC.
Wow. That's interesting. Well dang, now I know.
All right, so who's up next? Let's keep this show rolling.
These guys, I don't know. I don't know who that black and white not black and white, that like sort of not beige, whatever. I don't know who that guy is, that first guy. He looks like a church father, but I couldn't figure out which one he was. He looks like he's from one of those compendiums of church
It looks
fathers.
like the Pope's
Because
exorcist. Okay,
yeah, it's like a woodcut
looks
kind
like
of.
Russell Crowe.
Yeah, but I can't. I don't know. The next guy, this like shifty. I was saying this before. The shifty Romanian-looking fellow. It's not his best picture, but I don't know who the hell he is. I don't think it's Emil Ciran because I think Emil Ciran is way like. Emil Ciran is just elsewhere on this list. Okay. That third guy though, I figured out that is that's Abelard. So I don't think that's
Abelard.
really
Oh,
the
the
black
guy
and
with no dick. Okay, or testes.
white. Yeah, that's what I was.
He has no
That's what jumped to
tests.
mind first.
There's
Yeah.
never a test on Abelard, and that's why they don't teach him in
Yeah.
school. Or tests.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, for
Yeah.
Abelard, he's a statue. Well, that makes up for it. The fact that they have a bust for the man without tests.
Yeah.
Didn't Abelard have he did have like a theological development that was pretty significant.
I believe he pushed forward the development of the doctrine of limbo, if I'm not mistaken. Which is kind of cool.
Just for the babies.
Yeah.
That seems kind of weird. Like who
Well,
cares?
it's weird because he was a layman theologian, which is a bit kind of disturbing. I mean, what actually disturbs me is that he was like very sinful in like the medieval world, kind of, which is kind of odd because the medieval world was so like moral that that's pretty out there to I don't know, to mess up back when it actually mattered, kind of. as a famous person. Yeah.
Yeah, I know he had some dispute with Bernard Clairvaux, and he kind
Mm,
of bungled his, his defense, and he
yeah.
just never really he died kind of shortly after that.
Yeah.
Sic et non, yes and no. So that's his notable work according to the wiki.
Oh yeah.
Um, the
Seems a bit
first five
blithe.
questions: must human faith be compelled by reason or not? 2. Does faith deal only with unseen things or not? 3. Is there any knowledge of things unseen or not? 4. May one believe only in God alone or not? 5. Is God a single unitary being or not? This is kind of poetic almost. It's like these sort of
Hmm.
quasi irrelevant questions that make you feel things.
That's
Um,
interesting.
yeah, I mean, this guy, I like, the subtle doctor, John Duns Scotus. I feel like he's a little bit of a personality.
Yeah.
I know I actually had a professor that was known for studying Abelard, so there must be
Oh
some
wow.
sort of takeaway from his writings. I'm just not really
Yeah.
hip to it. Um,
Well, perhaps you could say that in the Middle Ages, generally, like because everyone was working on the same project. It's less likely that people are going to stand out for their own like totally distinct and unique worldview, with the exception of Aquinas, who is kind of a weird synthesis, who kind of is his own category, in that he like builds the system or something, but he also like is part of it.
hmm. And Sabellianism is he was accused of being a
I don't know.
Sabellian, so that's probably the most interesting thing I've heard about him so far. And that means so they believe that there's a simple unity of the person and nature of God.
Huh. Oh, so rather than distinct persons, the persons are the same. Is that it?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Well, no, it means that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are actually really they're like kind of finally distinct. They're not like figurative distinctions or nominal, appellative, appellative distinctions. So
Well, it sounds like it sounds like he's saying that there's only one divine person.
yeah, I think he subordinates Christ to the Father, the Son to the Father, right? So that would
Well,
tell
no,
me.
I think it's kind of the opposite heresy, sort of. It's not that he's bringing them too far apart, but he's like mushing them too close together. At least from what I'm seeing here.
No, he isn't. No, he isn't. He's saying that they are.
Uh,
Well,
I don't get what that has to do with patripassianism.
Patripassian modalism.
Like,
It's called.
oh,
It's a modalism.
oh, oh, I get it. So it's saying that they're not different people; they're just different modes of the same person. So
So
it's a very
so like it erases.
the personal distinction in
Yeah,
God.
it waters it down. Really, is what it does. It waters down the Trinity,
Yeah, exactly.
and
Yeah,
that
that's what
would
it
make
seems
him
like.
sort of lame. I don't know. I think Abelard just kind of sucks.
Yeah,
Based on all of this, he doesn't seem to have any redeeming qualities.
yeah,
He just sort of seems like a nuisance.
uh,
Even back then,
yeah,
like if you really believe in the Trinitarian or
yeah,
orthodox view, right? Then nothing he says is going to be like that great. He just seems like he's sort of a thorn in everyone's side, a gadfly, if it were.
yeah,
So I don't know, but he's definitely an interesting person. Like, there's not a lot of theologians from the Middle Ages that have such a complicated life that have been remembered.
yeah. Yeah.
like Peter Abelard. He's definitely the most famous one.
Yeah.
Um, but he's famous for being castrated. It's sort of grotesque.
Yeah, it is. It really is. It's pretty off-putting.
Uh, See, I don't know. Yeah, I don't. I sort of don't understand the significance. I think historically he's really important, but
Yeah.
philosophically he's sort of like a minor threat. Anyway, we should move on.
Yeah.
We want to get to the heavyweights, don't we?
Yeah. So, I mean, the only guy I recognize, and I had to Google it, was the fifth guy, the guy sitting in the chair reading the book next to, I think, Homer.
Is that
And
Alfred
that's,
North Whitehead?
yeah. And I know nothing about him.
Oh, he's
So,
cool, but he's a little
yeah.
a lot of his philosophy influenced some of the psychedelic brotherhood in the
Really?
60s. Like, yeah, it influenced a lot of the drop in, tune out kind of stuff with
Yeah.
acid and spiritual new age spirituality. Because his whole thing, I suppose, if I can make an extraction, was his whole
Yeah.
thing was that like you have to view everything as a process, and that means that
Yeah.
like everything you have to really be brutally aware of what is affecting what. You can't just
Huh.
like reduce things to like an event. Let's say you can't reduce an event to like simple categories. You have to view it as like a holistic process.
Hmm.
And he seemed to really have this. He seemed to really like you know uh, bank on this kind of doctrine of his. But I don't think it was super popular like on its face. But I think posthumously was pretty influential. And Yeah, I mean, a guy who's been influenced a lot by Whitehead in recent years is Rupert Sheldrake. But Rupert Sheldrake is a
Huh.
controversial intellectual. He's basically a fringe theorist.
Yeah.
So, but that just tells you how potent someone like Whitehead might just be.
Hmm.
Um, he's very concerned with energy, and he's less concerned with words and logic, which is ironic as he wrote the Principia with Russell, right?
Hmm. Well, that's notable. I mean,
So, I would say he's definitely not terrible or bad. Um, I would say, all told, he's probably good.
all right. Yeah, I mean, I think collaborating on the Principia or whatever
Well,
is, I don't
I
know.
mean
I think,
that just shows you that he could do logic, symbolic
yeah,
logic, right? You know,
yeah,
what do they call it? Not synchristic logic, but they call it like predicate logic. That's it. He could do like
yeah.
predicate logic or whatever. But I just
Hmm.
think like he's probably more known for his actual process philosophy in the long haul.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, he's good.
All right. So the next guy is Homer, I think, right? Is that Homer?
Homer, yeah. Homer,
Not a
okay, is
philosopher.
not a philosopher. There you go.
Yeah,
Like Petrarch,
yeah,
you can't put these literary giants. Are they going to get Virgil and I mean
yeah.
Dante, you could kind of do because he wrote De
A little
Monarchica,
bit. Yeah,
but like you just can't do this with Homer. First of all, we don't even know what Homer's opinions were. He never wrote nonfiction. As far it was never
yeah.
recorded, and we're very confident that he didn't even invent the story that he is famous for preserving in text. So,
Oh my.
and we don't even know his gender or his sex. We don't know his
Yeah,
sex, and although we could probably guess his gender based on his sex, because back then they didn't have non-binaries. But
yeah,
but yeah, I mean, I don't know. We got to skip past this one because this is sort of an irritance,
yeah.
and a little more,
Uh,
little else
and
more.
I don't know that next guy, which is weird that he's so clean shaven, and I know nothing about him. And then the guy that right of him, the Enlightenment, long haired, kind of smug guy. I don't know who that is. Is that Voltaire? Is that like is that
That's Voltaire. Yeah, I can
that
I
is?
know that anywhere.
Okay, he's still a smug guy.
Voltaire. Okay, well, Voltaire.
Not really a philosopher either,
he
is
was
he?
a satirist, a paroticist.
Yeah.
He was a critic. But he wasn't really like a systemizing philosopher.
Yeah.
He his ability to synthesize um, abstract ideas into a system that was logically compelling was reduced to kind of like like a plain materialist kind of landscape,
Hmm.
and he never really veered into the metaphysical.
Hmm.
So he's also kind of disqualified. But I do admit that he is in schools. They call him a philosopher. In like high school, they'll like teach about this guy in history class, European
Hmm.
history, when they talk about the Enlightenment,
Yeah.
and they'll be like, "Oh, this guy's a philosopher." So all that means is that he like was like really well read and wrote a lot. But like,
Yeah.
but it doesn't actually mean that because there was like Jean Jacques Rousseau and Montesquieu, like and some other people, even like Marquis de Sade is sometimes included as a philosopher. Like these guys, there
Yes.
are actual like people who wrote philosophical texts that are kind of like overshadowed by Voltaire because Voltaire was a more popular writer.
Yeah.
And Voltaire could be a philosopher, but he just didn't seem to be like he has. He I know for a fact that he wrote philosophical treatises, but they didn't like
Yeah.
catch on in any influential way, from my knowledge.
Yeah. So I mean, should we just do don't know?
I will say little influence. I'll say
Okay.
good because I know that this guy had to be influential just based on the
Yeah.
circles he was in.
Yeah.
He was
I mean,
more.
I
He
think
was
we can
definitely
just.
like. He's an example of someone that's kind of like. He's kind of like a non-literary philosopher. Like he doesn't write the books, but he's influencing other people's books so much that he's effectively writing their books for them. They're writing his books for them. You know what I mean? Like this guy, there's no way he wasn't like influencing the philosophers of his era.
Yeah, and
I mean, he's
through
like
that.
he's the department head, so
Yeah.
he gets high marks.
Yeah.
Um,
So these next guys are, uh, I think Avicenna and Averroes. Yeah.
oh yeah, well
Or
these guys are pretty good.
Averroes.
I mean, these guys kept the Islamic philosophical tradition alive for the limited years it was around. They're
Yeah.
all they're all pretty good. I would say influential in multiple schools for both of them.
Yeah.
Al
Yeah.
Farabi might be the next one. Um, One of them is probably
Oh,
groundbreaking. I'm not quite
wait. Sorry.
sure.
The guy, the unshaven guy, is a don't know. I don't know who that guy is. Uh, that's I think that guy. There's two guys with the turban.
Yeah.
The first is Averroes, and the second is that one is Avicenna or Avicenna or whatever.
Oh, you don't know the unshaven guy? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
but definitely those two were influential, although I don't know anything about. I think one of them believed that like all human beings shared the same soul or something, which is pretty bad
Crazy.
to be honest. Like that's a pretty big mistake in my opinion.
No, I don't
Like and
think
that
that they were like. I don't think that they were groundbreaking. But I do think that everyone was reading them, and that means that
yeah.
undeniably they were influential.
Yeah, it's like there's just between being wrong and being a bad philosopher. I don't know. Maybe I'm just slandering them, which would be
Not
depressing. But
every like group of philosophers is going to have like a groundbreaking philosopher, but that's a hard thing to do in any field. It's not just philosophy.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it's nearly impossible to do in any field.
So that guy with the mustache, I don't know, but the inverted guy next to him, that's Bertrand Russell.
Oh, yeah, I know they got back. That's Henry Bergson. Henry Bergson.
Oh, the vitalist sort of. That's all I
Yeah,
know
this
about
guy
him.
is a little bit like Alfred North Whitehead, actually,
Yeah. Well, how?
because he has an organic obsession. Like he wants things to be viewed in terms of their energetic value rather than their examined, sort of logically deduced value. Is he's kind of an anti-literary or anti-scientific type, holistic. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't think he's bad. I think he's a forerunner of the Whitehead, as far as I can tell. There's obviously he doesn't really have. He's kind of in a league of his own. He's a little bit like that guy, the Julius Evorla or whatever.
Evola, yeah.
He's in a league of his own, but that is always means that they're hitting some sort of touchstone. So I'm gonna put him at good.
All right. I don't know nothing about him, but probably.
Ugh.
I don't know who that. So yeah, there's Bertrand Russell there in inverted.
Bertrand Russell is sort of like kind of the rock star of his time for
Yeah,
philosophy. Um, a lot of his political stuff is insipid. He would like Chomsky. He was a strong pacifist, but was sort of just showboating.
yeah,
Um, I think he was really atheistic like Chomsky. He's kind of the
yeah. I
model
mean,
for Chomsky. He's kind of
yeah,
but his logical work was amazing.
yeah.
And he
That's
did he
true.
did sort of
Certainly.
underwrite or refute a lot of the logicians in the fin de siècle at the Vienna school, the Vienna
Huh.
Circle. I mean, so
Yeah,
he's a mathematician in addition to a logician. So it's just like how Chomsky is a linguist in addition to a logician. I think
yeah,
he's definitely going to be good. I think he taught Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein's pretty influential.
yeah.
I think he's up there by Bergson or whatever. Let me look up Bergson's, like, if we can just find like a synopsis on Bergson.
I think it was basically about like life force kind of and like
Yeah, it's very like
vitalism.
he was a priest, right?
I don't think so.
Oh, he wasn't. Um, Duration, intuition, effect, elan vital. That's right. His
Yeah. So
So this guy
I
is a
imagine.
little bit of a pseudo scientific kind of guy, but
Yeah.
it kind of works for the 1800s, So Bergson, I think, is still good because I think there are people that are patterned off of Bergson, and in the same way, I think there are people patterned off of Russell. I don't think Russell is entirely worth his weight in gold because
No, I mean I think yeah.
well, yeah, you can go, yeah.
I just think that like Russell, not only his politics, but Russell's like atheism is like kind of incredibly stupid.
It's
Like
puerile, frankly.
it's like weird. Yeah, it's like so he's weirdly lopsided. But yeah, I mean, from all that I know of him, he's like a logical genius. So you have to give him credit for that. But it's just odd that he would like
He
screw
plays
up
it
so much.
safe with everything he does. He has no real respect for the extemporaneous or the adventurous. It's kind of like it's kind
Yeah,
of he it's like he wants he's in denial of his own psyche or something. I don't get it.
hmm, that's interesting.
Yeah, like he's just excessively formal, like he has no real like
Yeah,
even though like in his own private life he could be kind of rambunctious. He doesn't like he's like his whole professional ethic is to present to the world as like some kind of like war between like order and decay, but it's all obviously
well,
more
yeah.
complicated than that.
I mean, I think it's extremely English. It's this. It's well, not actually English, but like there's a certain kind of Englishness that like people try to do. That's like part of British culture now, where it's just stiff. Everything's commonsensical. If it's not obvious, it's not real, and there's something very very horrible and evil and stupid about that. But that's not really his fault. Maybe I'm racist for blaming on national
Well, he
temperament.
has yeah. I mean, he has a stiff upper lip for sure.
But yeah, let's. I mean, let's. I think we should. There's so many here. I think
He's an
we got like
Edwardian kind of guy. He grew up in the Victorian era.
yes, yeah,
But beyond that, it's like, um, I just think he's trying too hard not to be awkward and weird. He's like the guy who like doesn't want to do anything weird, and if it's
yeah,
something's weird, then it's not logical, and he'll like try to laugh it away. And
yeah,
that kind of obsession with like propriety is
yeah,
sort of like his downfall. But you
yeah,
can't you can't disacknowledge that So I'm gonna put. I'm actually gonna lower him to little influence, mediocre.
Well, but that's the thing. Like, I feel like the logic systems that he built and worked on basically underlie all of modern computer science. But like, that's why we gotta have. That's why we gotta be. We can't judge by influence because you can be really influential in like a bad way. You know, that doesn't mean you're good.
All right, the logicians are always gonna get higher praise. Then I'll move
Yeah.
Abelard up too.
Okay.
It's a little mediocre.
Yeah. Ah, too bad. All right, look, let's just like we gotta make like a part two. Can we do like a few more and then like pause or something?
You're gonna do a
'Cause
part
this
two.
is yeah, because there's so many. This would take like
Well, how many
hours
have we
yet.
even done? I mean, we have to count it.
Oh yeah. Let me see. Scroll up. I have another copy so I can count how many there are in total, and we subtract that from like how many we've done.
Let's
So
see,
that's
1, 2,
one,
3,
two, three,
4,
four.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. 25.
Okay, 25 versus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 by 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So what did I say? What did I say? 12 by 11. That's like 132. So we're not even like a quarter of the way
Yeah,
through.
so let's just keep going for like a little bit, and then
Yeah. Okay.
um,
All right. Okay. So the next guy, and can we just plonk these dono guys in the dono slot? Like, I don't know the Dominican. I don't know the weird oblong faced man. I don't know
is that
him.
Thomas Aquinas? Who is that guy?
I don't think so. Let me see if
I
there's.
know
Let me
that
see if there's.
face. I know that guy.
I mean, he's a Dominican, which made me think it was Thomas, but he's not fat, which makes me think it's not. Uh
You see, he's that Spanish guy.
oh, I mean Saint Dominic,
No, he's
Saint Ignatius.
Spanish. No, he's like a Jesuit.
Uh,
Um,
huh. Spanish Jesuit. Spanish Jesuit philosopher. Uh, oh, by the way, I think Francisco Suarez is on this list, but that's not him. So yeah, I don't know.
um,
Oh, there you go. There's a big list of them. You know what? I'm actually gonna do a reverse image search. I'm sick of this. I'm sick of this snarky little chart not telling me who these guys are.
okay.
Um. Okay. So okay. Where the hell is he? There he is. So it's a little postage card stamp of a stern, like looking guy who I thought was a Dominican, but I guess he's not. Let's go to images.google.com. We paste him up.
I'm
Can I
getting pretty
paste? Oh
close.
shoot. You are okay. Shoot. Dragging the image in.
I thought it was
Do
Molina. It's not Molina. Um,
yeah, the quietist. Uh oh, that's Saint Bonaventure.
no.
You're right. He's a Franciscan. That's Bonaventure. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, why'd you say Dominican?
I don't know.
All right. All right.
I don't know.
Anyway,
I was
Bonaventure's
totally
very
wrong.
good. You know, you read his Mind's Road to God, or listen to it on audiobook,
Hmm.
and you can tell he's a full blown mystic. Um, and he's logical. It's all very well contained. I would say he's good. I don't know if everyone's cribbing off his notes or his over his books, but from what I can tell, he really he knows how to write a cohesive
Yeah.
logical framework and do it in a in a Trinitarian lens, which is not extremely easy. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think he's
I've
good
barely
for
read. Yeah.
what he was intending to do. I think he mostly did it on face value.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I don't know anything about him
I
really
mean, he's
besides.
extremely influential within the theology. I mean, even like theology within Christian theology is extremely influential. So, already, like that alone kind of counts for a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. You think Russell really is that good?
I don't. Well, that's the thing. Like these rankings are kind of weird. Like I feel like it's almost insulting to put them together. I mean, because I kind of idolize the scholastics, sort of, and someone like particularly someone who's literally like a saint.
All
They
right. Well,
must
anyway,
be.
let's. Yeah, we're drawing strange. We really are limiting. We're reaching our horizon here because there's such a radical difference between someone like Bonaventure and Bertrand Russell, and yet
Yeah,
we're sort of like implying that they share the same bread and everything. It's kind of insane.
yeah.
Anyway, let's move on to Confucius, someone a little different.
Okay. Well, yeah, he's going to be groundbreaking, I think,
He
because
has to be, right?
he's a contemporary of Plato. Weirdly, isn't
Kongzi,
he? Like,
Kongzi,
yeah,
Kongzi,
and
Kongzi,
he's just super into yeah, yeah.
Kongzi,
He's like perfect in a certain way,
Kongzi,
but with yeah, you said it.
Kongzi. Yeah, no, he's awesome. I mean, he's a little bit like the Joe Rogan of his time, I suppose. He was sort of this, middle of the road, hyper reasonable personality that people sort of like, flocked to and fell in love with to like a ridiculous extent. But he was like he's almost like a media personality. In his own time, he was exceptionally popular, and he was also in competition with so many other, um, like book writing, um, grandstanding sort of sages and stuff, and then those books got burned and his didn't. And so
Huh.
he ended up being emblematic of the past by the time that the emperors were trying to reevaluate who the best philosopher was of yore. And
Hmm.
Mencius came to the fore, and Mencius never met Confucius, but Mencius was constantly promulgating Confucius's teachings, his written
Huh.
teachings.
Hmm.
And so Mencius was kind of like, uh, he went to the pharaoh or whatever, and he was telling the pharaoh, "Don't listen to this
The emperor.
serpent wielder. Listen to me. I'm Moses." It's like Moses going before the pharaoh. That was kind of
Oh,
Mencius,
I see. Hmm.
preaching for God, and Confucius was the God. So Confucius is his reputation precedes him, but I don't think people realize how good his aphorisms actually are. His aphorisms
Yeah.
are incredibly salient and pungent, and if you read them, you're always going to be like, wait, I thought this guy was totally boring, but everything he's saying clicks in a way that no one else can make click. So
Hmm.
unusual because he's the only one that really defines the Eastern civilizations so much. The other one probably is the
Yeah.
Buddha. Um,
Yeah.
but he,
Absolutely.
for whatever reason, just a simple man ends up being one of the best literary giants in world history, and with such an exceedingly humble personage.
Wow.
I'm a huge Confucius fanboy.
Great.
Um, and his doctrines of the middle road, the middle. He was very interested in. Well, it's more Buddha, but he was very interested in modesty and awareness, and he was very interested in um, not overextending yourself, not becoming too involved in things that are inherently devastating and self-destructive. I think
Yeah.
he's a philosopher of balance, kind of like the Buddha, but he's a little bit more wily than the Buddha is. The Buddha is
Yeah.
more dour. Um,
Yeah.
and as a philosopher, he may kind of not really belong to the same manifold of thought that all these other guys belong to. He's not really part of the school, as let's say, but he, as kind of an alien, he is the best possible alien one could find. So I think he's groundbreaking.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I don't know nearly enough or as much about him, but yeah. I mean, just I get the sense that he's on the level of Plato. He's like the Eastern equivalent, kind of, or something. Vice
Yeah.
versa.
People always say Socrates is like Confucius, but in reality, Socrates was kind of like this lovable loser, homeless guy, and Plato was kind of like the leader of men who
Yeah.
built the academy. Confucius also was sort of this leader of men who built an academy. But not a lot is known about Confucius's actual life,
Yeah. Probably
and
because
he
he's so
died right
ancient.
before the Warring States period broke out. So even the Warring States period is sort of like in the dark. on Confucius and vice versa. Anyway, let's keep going. We got let's get like 10 or so.
Okay. I mean, do you want to go based on? I don't know.
Let's just do random now. I'll select.
Okay, go for it.
How about Immanuel Kant?
Oh wow. Well, he's definitely groundbreaking, right? I don't know.
Very famous. Um, I think I don't particularly agree with his philosophy. I think it's very reductionistic. He's
I never understood it
he's
honestly.
trying to disavow sort of ritualistic spiritualism, and he's trying to promote a sort of scientific lens or worldview by which social sciences and hard sciences are forced to conform to which they're forced to conform. And he does so. I mean, he's a philosopher of science. Um, uh, he's a philosopher of science without intending to be. Um, I think he's groundbreaking, but I also think he's wrong. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't
I
know.
don't
From
really agree with him. I think he's sort of he wants he likes to sort of over delineate between in his words the noumenal plane from the phenomenal plane, and I think that noumena and phenomena are more related than he is caring to confess or admit. And
yeah,
I think one
yeah.
is a confessional sphere and one is in the admittance sphere. One is corporeal and another is ethereal, or the other way around. And I think that the body mind distinction kind of applies for sure. But I also think that the distinction is isn't as bottlenecked as as one would as we tend to believe, and it's actually more open than that. But we're just not we just lost perception of it.
What do you mean? I don't understand.
Well, like when you look at the process philosophy or the Elan Vital, you're looking at a holistic philosophy that incorporates spirituality into materiality. But Kant
Oh,
is
okay.
is amongst the school of rationalists that sort of
Yeah.
wants to deny those basic empirical episodes as having any sort of informative weight on your own logical process. So
Yeah.
okay, yeah, I mean, there's like 100 ways to put this, but I just thought
Yeah.
I'd give it a go. Um, and
Sort of makes sense.
so up next, maybe we should do David Hume. What do you do with him?
Yeah.
Sort
I
of
mean,
similar.
I'd sort of put bad. I don't really know what his place is in the history of philosophy. I mean,
David.
I guess he kind of triggers Kant to be more influential, but I know he was just an empiricist, very very um fixated on what can be observed and all that, and kind of cynical.
Well, he has an interesting life. His personality is charming from a distance. I have a suspicion that in person he was kind of like a kind of cold and like sort of uninteresting. But
Uh-huh.
you read his life on like any biographical source, and he comes off as rather spontaneous and down to earth and level headed and sort of the
Hmm.
life of the party for a philosopher. But I don't think that David Hume would we. I don't think most people would have found him that charming.
Yeah.
Um, but his reputation probably preceded him so much, and anywhere he went, that no matter what circle he was in, he's just kind of people overlooked that he was sort of dull, sort of tedious. Um,
Hmm.
his philosophy on its own, does it stand on its own?
I don't.
Um, he was known for sort of being a staunch atheist.
Yeah. So I think
Despite
he's
being an empiricist, he was a staunch atheist. So to me, it seems a little contradictory sometimes. But
well, I think he was extremely influential, but like Bertrand Russell, kind of in a bad way. Like it's this new kind of frontier, so
he's
to speak.
exactly like
Of
David. He's the original Bertrand Russell, or he's the one from his time. I think
yeah,
he's a little. He's like his necessary evil in some ways, and he's very aware of sort of the objective limitations of spirituality. And
yeah,
so, because there is such obvious, undeniable objective limitations,
yeah.
he just sort of downplays its role as much as possible, almost like a tyrant.
Hmm.
And I think there's something sort of there's a malady to that.
Yeah.
So him and Russell, I'm demoting to mediocre. I
All
don't
right.
in my this is my list, right? In my list, or what's our list, but it's my channel. In my estimation, these guys are doing a disservice to philosophy. I really think so overall.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like a deep kind of thing, a deep set
They have a
problem
lot
that's
of good
kind of
stuff that they're doing, but it's all in the service of an ideology that I don't agree with.
yeah, yeah. I would agree.
Um, and it's funny. I'm learning more about it as I go along with this. It's actually I'm actually learning about my philosophy while grandstanding and bloviating about you know my perfect system that's in my head already. I mean, it's like always
Yeah,
humble, right? Always humble.
kind of have to define yourself against others, I guess, to
Okay,
some
up
extent.
next, Thomas Hobbes.
Uh Leviathan or something.
I'll say this guy. This guy is the opposite of Hume's. This guy seems like a horrible person, but in real life, he was probably pretty funny. Like in Leviathan, he compares like the body politic to the human body and talks about different organs as though they're
Yeah.
different. You know what I mean? Like they're as if they're like like the lungs would be the parliament, the
Oh.
judiciary would be the intestines, like goofy things like that I don't remember. And
Huh.
I think if you're gonna write that in your your colophon or your prologue or whatever,
Hmm.
you're pretty hip to what makes people tick emotionally. But he was doing it in kind of like you're saying before. He was doing it kind of in the service of like a very intense um, and somewhat systematic criticism of government.
Yeah.
And of course, his interpretation is that government must be formulated in the manner that promotes order to the highest expression, and
Hmm.
that necessitates some measure of tyranny that's healthy.
Wow.
Now, this sort of quasi-fascist or
Yeah.
proto-fascist sort of attitude is problematic, but I don't know if it's problematic at every turn. And I don't even know if overall his full meaning is really to devour uh,
Yeah.
democracy and devour um, mob rule or devour anarchy. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not really sure if he hates those things fundamentally or if he just doesn't value them as much as a top-down system.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, in my opinion, it's kind of like we're often I feel like we're often taught the history of philosophy as if it began in the modern era, and like there was no classical theory that someone like Thomas Hobbes is reacting against. So to us, he might seem like less controversial than he may have seemed at the time because he was reacting against some theory that like if that was ever presented to us, it would make more sense. But because I mean, this is just hypothetical, but I imagine that like what really sticks out is this kind of um, this sort of proto fascistic idea of government or like how it should be, or almost like it's like this kind of simplification of the common good and the state and all that. And so what I'm saying basically is maybe it's worse than we think. Like if we read it literally, it's probably just like not that bad. There's only this like tiny little inkling of something, but and I guess this may be a Hegelian, but like it's my belief that like if you make one little deviation that's appealing, it kind of like starts a fire, and eventually that fire grows up to consume a lot of things. But I don't know that much about Thomas Hobbes, but that's my impression.
Well, Hobbes is really pessimistic, and his view is that the whatever you do, human nature will defy it, and human nature will rend asunder what you've built, and human nature will make
Mm,
every man's individual selfishness become his sole concern in life, and that will torture and go to war with everyone else. Literally, the
yeah,
phrase he uses is a Latin phrase,
yeah,
and that phrase is bellum omnium contra omnes, which is
yeah,
war of all against all.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and he's
So
really
that,
cynical. He's very very cynical, and
yeah,
he kind of doesn't have a solution beyond his this incipient cynicism.
yeah,
And to be fair, he writes in a charming style, but I don't know if that charm lends to any sort of arena of solution. Um, I think
well,
he's one of the better writers amongst philosophers,
yeah,
like Schopenhauer. But I don't
yeah. Well, yeah,
like Plato, Hobbes, and Schopenhauer. I think he's one of the better writers, which says
yeah,
something.
yeah. I mean, the weird thing is, speaking of Schopenhauer, and we'll get to him, I guess, but like, even though I disagree with Schopenhauer completely, like his writing style, just because of the harshness of his worldview, the writing style does not like mess around. Like the writing style will like shoot uh straight to the point, so to awkwardly speak. And the metaphors are also good. So that's a weird commonality, you know. You were mentioning that the metaphor or whatever of the state and the body is an intriguing one and one that's maybe particularly apt. And I noticed that in Schopenhauer as well. He has these certain metaphors that are just like brilliant. Even if you can't go with him to believe in him, you know, there's something of benefit in like a genius who can write very clearly, particularly when so many of these philosophers are just hobbled by their own like terrible writing style and just like obscure or ugly or somehow like not getting the point across in a beautiful and persuasive way. um
So
I guess it's
what's
the
what's your
triumph of
rank for him? I'm favorable, but not overly so.
I mean, again, it's like I guess good. I don't really know that much about him, but like I am one to prize style. I mean, above substance, I guess. Or maybe style is just a subset of substance that's too often neglected.
You would say good.
Yeah, I mean, it feels kind of bad putting him next to Bonaventure. Not to be just like I'm not even being like overly pious. It's just
You know
like,
what though? I think when he was writing during the English Civil War.
well, that's what I
Puritan.
was that's what I was gonna say. Yeah, his context has to be. You have to look at him in his historical context. Now, I would imagine that like if you're having all these giant wars of religion, you would come to the quite reasonable conclusion that human nature is just inherently aggressive and violent, or like,
Yeah, I mean there's something sort of intermediary about the whole conclusion there, but I do think that you have to get to it at some point, and if you don't ever accept that human nature is corrupt,
yeah,
then you're never going to be a serious thinker
yeah,
on
no,
moral grounds. So
I
yeah,
agree.
I think he's I view him favorably. Good.
But I mean that's sort of what I'm saying, that like the thing is that in the tradition was that human nature was corrupt. And so, for example, someone like Calvin, to connect Calvin and Hobbes, Calvin would say that like human nature was completely depraved. So it's like it's almost like this exaggeration of, and in our context, we live in a context where human goodness is exaggerated, and so we might find it refreshing. Someone like Thomas Hobbes, who perhaps exaggerates human evil, uh, but that doesn't mean he's novel in his bringing to light human evil. Well, except that maybe just in his study on it and his examination of it, even though he overrates it on the whole, he still brings out some truths that are there that other people hadn't really noticed about human just evil, basically, or the imperfection of human nature. I mean, it's one thing to say human nature is actually evil and like totally malicious, and it's another to say that like it's sort of imperfect.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Well, there's only you had some you hang your coat somewhere. I think we have a good swath of competent philosophers in
yeah,
good camp, and
yeah.
I'm sure we'll find some more. Now let's just try and knock out some in rapid fire succession, so that we can
Okay,
really plow through this
yeah,
and not have to do two more of these.
okay. I mean,
How about
I would
John Stuart Mill?
uh pretty. I don't know, pretty bad, I guess. It's again, it's this like it's like a weirdly like hyper stupid philosophy, sort of.
Yeah, he's like, well, he was. Did you know he was the godfather of Bertrand Russell?
No, I didn't, but that sort of makes sense.
It's
Wasn't he
incredible.
also
Yeah, incredibly
connected? Yeah,
utilitarian. He's very he leaves everything to the numbers, and he just sort of what works on paper, and sells magazines is good enough
yeah.
for
It's
him.
it's it's like bizarrely unwise. It's like anti philosophy, like more than anyone has ever even realized. But it reminds me. There's this phrase that Nietzsche uses, where he says like English flatheads, and I think he uses it in reference to utilitarians. And it's true. It's like it's just missing the point on such a big level, and it's kind of obnoxious. It's
Oh,
kind of frustrating. So
flathead,
I'd put him in bad
round heads,
because
flatheads. Was it round
yeah.
heads too? Right.
Uh, I don't know.
Okay,
I think
I'm
flatheads
thinking
just
of
meant
I'm
like
thinking of the
idiot.
Whigs versus Tories again.
Yeah,
Well, he's very influential, so I'll put him in influential of the multiple schools.
yeah, he is. Our whole world is basically utilitarian now, but no,
Whereas the
it's not a
the
good thing.
opposition to it would be deontological.
Yeah, or even virtue ethics.
I
You
don't
know,
think his predecessors that seemingly have a divergent attitude or
yeah.
demeanor would differ strongly with him on his utilitarian stance. I mean, well,
Like what do you mean?
like Hobbes, I don't think Hobbes would necessarily view utilitarianism as flawed. I think for him he
Hmm.
is essentially a proto utilitarian.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think modern philosophy probably um, is tending in this direction. So he gets credit for for sort of drawing out the implicit assumptions, sort of. And I think Hume would agree too, probably. Hume would almost certainly agree. I get that same sense. But I don't think that's a good thing, you know? I think actions are intrinsically good or evil, kind of.
Okay, so let's
At
let's,
least,
let's kick it up a notch and keep with the utilitarians. How about
all right.
Jeremy Bentham? What do you say for Jeremy Bentham?
Um, I think Bentham was like sort of more nuanced. So I'm less opposed to him, honestly.
He was eccentric, but he was curvaceous. He kind of he could duck to the changes.
Vicious.
Yeah. Well, he was definitely
Yeah.
fat, but that's not what I meant.
Yeah. Rotund.
Let's see. Well, he was kind of like the English Benjamin Franklin, was he not?
Well, it looks like him.
No, I mean he was an inventor.
Huh.
He was a weird had weird personal habits. He
Yeah.
founded a university, University College London. Um,
Yeah.
he was sort of what David Hume kind of thought he was. Jeremy Bentham
Yeah.
was like really really like leaning into it, being this
Yeah.
eccentric kind of like dashing sort of madman. David Hume kind of like was like anxious that he seemed that way, whereas Jeremy Bentham really was embracing it.
Huh.
I don't know everything about David Hume, but I'm just saying that's the perception I get.
Yeah. Yeah. He just seems like a total. I mean, I don't know why I'm favorable to him because like in retrospect, he seems like just he's the godfather of all our woes, so to speak. Like this guy could be on Reddit this very day, and Nothing that he said would be controversial at all. Which is, he won. He's like, that's insanely influential. To be like the bourgeois, like moralist and guy par excellence, sort of. Um,
Yeah, well, I
but
did that. He proposed this panopticon, right? And he did it because he thought it'd be cheaper
yeah,
than the prisons.
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like this whole utilitarian idea of justice, in fact, where like we just imprison people to keep from harming others. It on the surface seems more um, merciful or compassionate, but in fact, it's not because you just treat people like machines with no free will.
And the other thing is that you do this panopticon, and you're starting
Yeah,
to promote the surveillance state.
yeah,
And
that's what I'm saying. Like he's way ahead of his time, like in a bad way.
yeah, well,
So what do you do with that?
he obviously is scared of criminals in a way that is sort of jarring. I almost think he might be prescient about how malign crime will become later on. I mean, even in his time, I think criminals might have been almost more welcome, and now crime is so gruesome that we do have cameras everywhere. But
Hmm.
I think in his time he was almost like obsessed. But then at the same time, maybe criminals were always the same level of ugly, and
Yeah,
he was just having sort of a standard, police chief reaction to
yeah.
the woes of
Well,
the day.
I mean, I think a police chief reaction would be sort of more moralistic than tough on crime, not like engineering crime away using advanced technology. That's sort of a very novel way of looking at it,
Yeah,
I
it's
think.
almost like AI again. He's an AI toady, isn't he? No, he really, to me, is sort of like a techie. He's sort of autistic.
Yeah,
Um, do you want me to say bad? I'll put him in bad,
yeah, but let's also put
but
the
he
other
is
one.
influential.
Yeah, so what are you gonna do? I mean, he's basically the same as John Stuart Mill. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, I think John Stuart Mill really kind of
Was more influential.
more influential. Like I think Bentham
All
was
right.
this eccentric that was well known, and John Stuart Mill like globalized whatever
Yeah,
Bentham kind of was like, had an inkling of
yeah. Put it
the
forth more
flaming
seriously.
tinder,
That makes sense.
So yeah, I'll say Bentham was bad, but I think for what was smart about Bentham was really forged into being by Mill,
Yeah,
Stuart's Mill. Okay, up next. Um, I mean, they're not like it's not a night and day difference. It's more of like a
yeah,
Moses and Jesus difference.
yeah.
Okay, Martin Luther.
Hmm. Martin Luther. Uh, Terrible, I guess.
You don't like Protestantism?
No, I mean, I realized lately. I think that like the idea of private conscience had to be born, and it had to be like recognized. I think Luther was for that, wasn't he? Doesn't he kind of represent like stubborn private conscience against like the world, the whole society, kind of? I don't know.
Well, he was, I mean, on many layers, he was ridiculous. He was anti-Semitic. He was
Yeah,
kind of a sociologist more than anything. It seems like he was obsessed with where money was going. So
yeah,
he was a kind of a welfare bum, kind of social justice warrior type. But at the same time, the Catholic Church was indulging, the rich in ways that were
yeah.
totally
That
licentious.
that's a great point. Like he has the positive angle of conscience on his side if his conscience was clear, which I don't think it was because I remember he suffered from scruples while he was like an oblate or whatever. Like when he was a monk, he was like always extremely worried about sinning or something. So it's almost like he's almost like a victim of a baroque. I mean, not actually baroque, like an overdeveloped kind of theology that didn't allow for the way the things were going. Um,
I've heard him
and to
been
your
called
yeah,
the last medieval man, which I don't quite agree with, but I can see why. He has this sort of brashness that you never find in later
Yeah.
theologians.
Well, and I think, but yeah, I also think like
Overweening
you're right.
brashness.
There was a lot to protest in the church, but like I don't think he, I don't think he protested it in the proper way. You know. I mean, it's not. It's weird. It's like I can't. It's hard to blame
Yeah, I
him
mean, he didn't have to
sort
like
of
flip
because
it upside down. I mean, he could have just sort of piecemeal
yeah,
reformed it.
like yeah, or just try and compare him to like Savonarola or whatever, who's probably not on this list. He's not really a philosopher, but like Savonarola was he didn't like blow up and go crazy and like freak out and like
Well, he tried to.
defy. Yeah, but like it was in a different way. He didn't say like he didn't deny the entire concept of the church as such. Sort of, it wasn't this like massive mega revolution under the guise of returning to the roots. Um, so I mean, I think well, that's what I'm saying. I sort of admire Savonarola's protest against worldliness, and I don't admire Martin Luther's because, for one thing, he was sort of by the standards of the time, he was really worldly, and I think he was, anyways. I mean, it's hard to sort of sift out the Catholic, pro-Catholic polemic and triumphalist legends and myths and nonsense from like who he actually was and what his story was. But yeah, he's got some really rough spots. So I think he's pretty bad, honestly. Overall, he seems like
As
a bad
well,
guy.
as a philosopher, I don't think he was that sophisticated.
Yeah,
As an influence on subsequent philosophers, I don't think he was that um, pertinent.
yeah,
I'll say little influence or mediocre because really he was a
yeah.
rebel rouser.
Well, I mean, he was insanely influential, but
Oh,
maybe not as
but
a
still
philosopher.
he was a rebel rouser, and
Yeah,
his diminution on the sacraments was sort of neither here nor there in my view.
yeah,
I mean, you could argue that it was more expedient than having to have fully formed sacraments, but beyond that,
yeah. But oh,
I
sorry.
don't see the utility in it. So yeah, I would say he's a mediocre influence to philosophy, theology different, but
Yeah, we
philosophy.
gotta not. I mean, and I think I've been looking at this like in a very kind of dumb sense where I'm not restricting it to, the actual categories. So I'm gonna try and focus on that going forward.
Okay, so we can do
Let's do Weininger. Otto Weininger caught my eye.
Otto Preminger. Would
I've
be
been
more
reading him
interesting.
lately. No,
Weininger's fine.
Weininger.
Which one is
Weininger.
he? We have Guy Deleuze.
He's to the left of.
Oh, by the way,
He's to the
I think
left.
this is Joan Baudrillard.
Uh, crap. Where?
Yeah, the guy you said was Joan Baudrillard wasn't Joan Baudrillard.
Who
That
is
was
he?
Guy Deleuze.
Wait. Okay.
They look the
Okay. Can you
Guy
mouse
Deleuze.
over?
Guy Deleuze looks like he wears glasses, but he doesn't. And Jean Baudrillard actually wears glasses, but he sounds like he doesn't.
Oh, you're right. That is Deleuze. Okay,
Yeah,
you're right.
that's why I
You're
always
totally
confuse
right.
him because Guy Deleuze sounds like he wears the glasses, but it's actually Jean Baudrillard
Yeah.
who wears glasses.
Damn. Well, sorry
So
about
we
that.
already did. Okay,
This
what
was
about Guy?
my
Let's do Guy
my
Deleuze
mistake.
then. Let's do Guy Deleuze, and then we can do
Uh,
Otto.
dude, I hate. Like I said, I'm like I'm so allergic, and not even as a person, but as a person, but also philosophically. Like I hate, I hate him so much. So terrible.
He's just
My bids were terrible. Just
sententious,
illegible,
and,
snarky nonsense.
and
Such a staggering amount of pride for such a incoherent mess of ugly,
okay,
malicious
we'll call him bad, if not
nonsense. It's
terrible.
like, yeah, it's truly abominable in my mind. But maybe I just don't understand his deep theory. What annoys me is like everyone I know who likes him is like just so annoying and awful and snide and sorry to be such a
I think
drama
he's
kid
probably
or
just
whatever, but
he has some sort of funny,
it's like
quirky.
sophomore,
He
it's
has
like
quirky
juveniles when
literary
they blow
value
up like that. But
because he um
yeah,
he has this quirky literary value because he talks about rhizomes, right? And he uses oddball metaphors,
oh,
and it's like,
dude,
oh well,
yeah,
this guy is a serious thinker because he's so poetic, you know.
Yeah,
It's worse than Foucault. I mean, at least
but
Foucault like just is clearly
yeah,
insane. But
Foucault. Yeah, exactly. Foucault is very is he's easy to explain, even if you disagree with him. He's not an obscurantist, you know.
not really, not really. He's just so crazy.
Yeah,
Whereas Guy Deleuze is like trying to be cute, like a cat,
yeah,
all the time.
yeah,
Coy.
exactly. I feel like that's the French thing. I know it's painting with a broad brush, but like I feel like the national temperament can really mess you up, even if you're a good philosopher. I mean, maybe at some point we're gonna come to Lacan, but like I think Lacan has some amazing ideas, but it annoys me that you have to like shovel all the shit out of the way for like 10 hours to like get something interesting,
Yeah, I think the
even though it's
French are just
there,
like
in my
sex
opinion. But
addicts. I think that's what it really is. And they just everything they do has to like
yeah,
pertain to them trying to be like a pickup artist or something. Um,
yeah, I kind of agree. But
uh,
anyway,
anyway,
moving
so
on.
who can we move on to? Erasmus, Karl Marx, Socrates, Martin Heidegger, Georg Hegel, Jürgen Habermas.
Um,
R.I.P. I'm going to pre-R.I.P. Jürgen Habermas because he's literally
okay,
going to die in a year. I swear. You know how
dang,
old this guy is? He's like 104.
is he really?
He's,
I gotta
he's the
get up.
only living Frankfurt School person.
Yeah,
We could do him. Let's do him.
I. All right, okay, go for it.
I think this guy is very good at writing philosophical tomes. I don't necessarily
Yeah,
know if they're going to last the test of time, but I think that if you like Francis Fukuyama, you like that sort of systematic, beautiful, logical sort of opulent writing that kind of is
yeah.
clear and very like Roman and Latinate, but at the same time,
Hmm.
it's also very like just sort of Enlightenment in 1600s and 1700s in its
Hmm.
presentation. I think if you like that kind of stuff, you'll like Jürgen Habermas. I think he tries to sort of keep that sort of front and center style alive,
Hmm.
and his credulity as um, as a systemizer might be a little too much. He's a firm rationalist, is my estimation, but I
Yeah.
think he kind of really embodies like the modern, the contemporary sort of beauty in that attempt as an art. But I don't know. I haven't read his books; they're very hefty. You know, it's like I can't just
Yeah.
read every turgid book these days. But now that I'm
Yeah.
dwelling on it, I really want to. I really want to check out Habermas to find out what kind of um, structures that he sort of draws out in his books. Because if anyone's drawing out structures in their books, it's going to be this guy. I'll tell you that much. And it's not, and they're going
Yeah.
to be in plain English too.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, again, that's really important to me. I know nothing about him, but from what you've said, that's a pretty good endorsement. Sort of holding on to reason, and rationality in this kind of wild age. There's something noble
I
about
mean, it
that.
might
That's
end up just being some sort of window pane around categories again. Like it might be kind of a dead
yeah.
end, but I still think it'll be elegant.
Yeah. And there's kind of a strange value and beauty to that. I think.
Opulent is the word I use. I think there is something opulent about the books that Habermas writes. I think
Hmm.
he's really someone worth reading, even if it's just as an intellectual exercise. Kind of like a more sophisticated version of that guy who wrote uh, Godel, Escher, Bach. You know who I'm talking about?
Yeah. Yeah. I do. I don't know who wrote it though.
He wrote this sort of
Look
like
it up.
logical thought loop styled book, and he did it like
Douglas Hofstadter.
yeah. This, but Habermas is like a more productive version of that.
Yeah.
That guy was kind of a whimsical, self indulgent douche, but Habermas is whimsical and self indulgent, but not a douche.
Oh well, he's got one up on him then.
One up. I wouldn't call him whimsical. Actually, I'm sort of fanboying out, aren't I? Anyway, um, how about we do Hegel?
Hegel is groundbreaking.
Okay, we'll do ground. Yeah, Hegel rhymes with bagel, so that's always a good
Yep.
sign. I think Hegel is perhaps the second most influential philosopher on this list. Um,
Who's number one?
to me, number one is
Yeah.
Aristotle.
Yeah,
I think Aristotle has to
yeah,
be the number one philosopher.
yeah. I think you're
He,
probably yeah. I
I
think you're
because
right.
he's an enigma because he doesn't really present his own work. He has the students, lecture notes,
Yeah,
so you don't really know how much was said the way it was said. Uh,
yeah.
and you have two different students writing the notes apparently. So
Hmm.
yeah, but yeah. So Hegel, for me, is one of the few philosophers whose sort of interpretation of Fichte's synthesis, thesis, antithesis, his interpretation is sort of what I use. I'll probably on a semi daily, like once every other day or so. I probably use that in some way or another to
Dang.
evaluate a phenomenon or a circumstance or an
Hmm.
event from the past. But also, but like I said, but mostly I use it for the present phenomenon
Yeah.
in a phenomenon or a circumstance. And
Hmm.
if you don't understand Hegel, then I think you're really at a loss in the modern political landscape. Or sorry, political for sure. That's just an aside. I meant to say the modern philosophical landscape.
Hmm.
I think Hegel really is the linchpin for like what makes someone a capable philosopher or not. If you don't appreciate Hegel, I think you're kind of a tool.
Yeah, I think he's yeah, like you said, he's the modern philosopher, just as
Par
Aristotle
excellence.
is. Yeah, just as Aristotle is the like ancient philosopher, basically. And I mean, I would say obviously Aquinas is the medieval philosopher, as long as I'm saying "the" in
Yeah, I
capital
was going to
letters.
go with Aquinas as well. Yeah, I think Aquinas is.
Yeah, because it's just it says it all. It like captures it, and it even captures the spirit of the age in its form. Antiquity was kind of weird and mysterious, and all Aristotle's corpus is shrouded in kind of obscurity and mystery, but at the same
Okay,
time,
but
it's
I
very
disagree with you.
straightforward.
I think a Hegel encapsulates in the modern era, whereas I think
Yeah,
the early, like the Enlightenment and all that, is encapsulated probably more by like Thomas Hobbes or someone than it is
yeah,
by Hegel.
yeah, and it's probably too big of a thing to lump the entire modern era together. But yeah, Hegel's like he still seems kind of futuristic. The little I've read of him, it's very like it's kind of fascinating. He does have a little bit of the obscurity bug, but it's not as obnoxious, I
Okay,
guess,
well,
for
while
some
we're on
reason.
the topic of futuristic obscurity bugs,
Yeah.
let's talk about one of the successors to Hegel, Martin Heidegger. Where do we put
Mm.
him?
Um, I kind of feel like he's not. He's a bit overrated. I hate to say,
Yeah,
in my opinion, just because he's sort of put forth as this like ultimate obscure deep genius, but I kind of think that
you don't think he's Hegel round two?
no, he's definitely not. Hegel is actually obscure. Like he's not really a celebrity in the same way that Heidegger kind of was. And I feel like Hegel was way more original. Like I actually think that Heidegger, I kind of think you can find most of Heidegger in Husserl. I don't know that much about it, but that's kind of my intuition.
Yeah, well,
And
Husserl was the creator of phenomenology, and
yeah,
Heidegger was his successor, his forebear, or whatever. Oh,
yeah.
is that what a forebear is? I don't remember, but he's
I think a
he's,
forebear is
he's
is
a,
the opposite.
yeah, he's the
Husserl is
scion.
Heidegger's
He's the
forebear.
scion of Heidegger, of
Yeah,
Husserl,
yeah,
and
exactly.
but his books are like who's also like that is Jean Paul Sartre is also supposedly a phenomenologist, and he's also kind
Yeah,
of overrated and obnoxious. So you kind of get the
yeah,
French and German version of the same deal.
yeah. I kind of agree. I mean, I do think there's actually a lot of merit to Heidegger, but he doesn't. Again, he's like a little overrated. Even though he's amazing, he's like not quite that amazing. So I don't
Yeah.
know,
So, what do you think?
but
Good or little influence, mediocre?
I would say good. He's definitely not mediocre. He's a
Okay.
solid philosopher,
Yeah, I
but
mean, he's definitely like if you only read Heidegger, you wouldn't really get that far. But if you don't read Heidegger, you're kind of like a doofus. He is kind of um ex, he kind of I think once you can access Heidegger, your gains in philosophy kind of exponentialize. That's my personal take.
hmm,
He really
yeah,
he's kind of a proving ground as in terms of reading, but then it also, I guess that means he's kind of a milestone that you read Heidegger and you understood it, and you incorporated it.
Yeah,
And it's
I'm trying to
backwards
think.
compatible with a lot of the medieval stuff and like ancient stuff. It's not like
Well, yeah, but again, I feel like that's almost probably true for phenomenology as such, which is why I think that maybe Husserl is probably like
no, but
the really
Husserl is
underrated
is,
one.
is is more illegible than Heidegger. I hate
Oh
to
yeah,
say it because Heidegger actually
okay,
gives you a technique that's
yeah.
phenomenological, whereas Husserl is broadly sort of laying out a textbook for it. That's
Hmm.
my awareness on it, at least. I don't know.
Oh, so
I
yeah,
should
I
read
don't
more.
really know either, but I would actually, and again, this is like weirdly just kind of a guess, but I would guess that in Husserl things are sort of still too objective almost, and then in Heidegger, like the subjective becomes part of what's going on, which is important, I think. I mean, I know it's pretty vague, but the whole point of phenomenology is observing states of consciousness, and there's still a bit of rigidity perhaps in Husserl where like you're classifying and typifying in a very kind of overly rationalistic way that's not suited
Mechanistic,
to the
yeah.
sorry, you cut out for a second, which is not suited to the thing you're
Overly
studying.
mechanistic way, yeah.
Yeah, and then in Heidegger it's like the form and the content sort of merge in a way that's more natural, maybe.
Yeah, I think Heidegger has a more human approach to that mechanistic kind of outlook, and but then from Heidegger you get some ugly babies too. So
Yeah, certainly.
I see your point. Okay, up next, let's do Descartes.
Hmm. Well, I mean, I tend to discard Descartes out of hand, probably unfairly, out of this like I don't know. There's a thing with Enlightenment guys where I just kind of I don't know. I find them like not interesting. Like the whole gap between medieval and modern philosophy just seems like a bunch of almost like compromises. Like they wanted to be modern, but they couldn't really be fully modern yet. So it's like this kind of strange early modern stuff, which is not very interesting. But that said, I now believe that they're all sort of necessary. Every big philosopher, with few exceptions, is kind of necessary. And I think Descartes is as well in his own way. And I guess the necessity is, it's like phenomenology almost sort of begins with him in a way, in that introspection where he looks at his own sense of existence. Like it's very basic, but it's very significant.
Yeah, I mean he has a kind of a childish approach to philosophy. However, it ended up being really effective and impactful. Um, I guess in the what was it, the 1500s, right?
Something like that.
Yeah, 1555 or something. I think back then, like Galileo's time, like being a
Yeah.
philosopher that wasn't strictly a monastic was kind of like an edgelord move, and you had to be sort of a dweeb to really pull it off, right?
Yeah.
And I think Descartes is emblematic of that. And when he hides himself away in this oven to come up with his ideas, he's departing from his previous profession as a mathematician and sort of transmogrifying into a like a psychopath. But it culminates in him having some pretty decent ink blobs on the parchment. I guess I don't know. I feel like
Yeah.
I feel like he's sort of like a Blaise Pascal type. Like he's sort of like he writes
Yeah.
these waste books of notes, and he's just like, well, this is my theorem, and everywhere I go, I'll like cloyingly remind them that I devised it, and eventually I'll get a job somewhere for someone, and in fact he did, and then he ended up dying in the cold because he couldn't even was never granted proper lodging or so he just died from like pneumonia. But
Jeez.
did you know that he was like a tutor for like a queen, but they didn't give him good lodging, and so he had to walk like really far in the snow to like work
Oh
and
wow.
back, and he just
Yeah.
got like pneumonia and died just from walking to
Oh
work.
boy. That's unfortunate. Yeah.
It sounds a
It's
little like made up or something, like like
yeah. Yeah, like a cover story for his assassination. Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah,
guess.
he got sick. It was the cold that did it, right? Yeah. Those cold walks, that'll kill you. Yeah, that's why he's dead. Anyway,
But knowing him
Odin,
as much
yeah.
as you can, I think from on prima facie, I think he probably didn't mind the walk at first, and then the weather got a little bit colder, and he still was like, well, I'm just gonna like think a lot while I walk and whatever. And he just sort of like he just like was like not attentive to how cold he was getting, and he probably was walking like a comparatively long distance. Like you probably couldn't even see the castle from where he started. That kind of thing.
It's all really funny. A lot of nice little
Like maybe like
touches
a
on it.
2 hour walk. Who knows?
Wow. But that's dismal. I guess it was olden days though. You mentioned Galileo. It reminded me that my theory sort of, and this might just be a totally woolly narrative, is that uh Copernicus discovers that the Ptolemaic model is false, and that leads to like this kind of confusion and doubt. And that leads to, I think, Francis Bacon, this Novum Organon or whatever, looking into like the ways in which our perceptions distort our view of reality. And I think that little inkling of skepticism which begins in him evolves and is kind of completed in Descartes' like maximum skepticism, where he's as skeptical as he possibly can be. And from there he discovers like the self kind of. I, I'm sort of go way back, but I just think that's like I think that's kind of a plausible theory for like his whole deal. And I think modern philosophy since has kind of been preoccupied with the self, like in a way that it just wasn't on anyone's radar
Yeah, it
before.
becomes navel gazing that hinges on narcissism. It's like
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a weird thing. Like, I feel like narcissism kind of is almost not. I don't know. I won't say it's
revamped.
not possible.
It
Well, I mean,
reindustrialized philosophy.
someone like Max Stirner is like not really possible before. I think there could not be a medieval or an ancient version of him. Really, I mean, ancient skepticism was totally different. I think. Um, I
So
don't
where
know.
do you want to
Yeah,
put Jurgen Habermas and Rene Descartes, the legend
I
of
don't know anything. I don't know anything about Jürgen Habermas. I just know Descartes is extremely influential, so I'd call him influential. He's actually up there.
into multiple schools? Yeah. Well, do you think it's
Yeah.
better than Kant? I guess that's the clincher.
Oh man, I guess not. I guess Kant is influential. Why did we put Kant so low? Did we give Kant just good?
We put him at groundbreaking. So
Kant is
who's
groundbreaking.
more groundbreaking, Descartes or Kant?
Oh, that's interesting. I think Kant is nevertheless more groundbreaking. I'm not really sure why.
That's
I
what they
just get this
say.
feeling that
Yeah, that's what they always
yeah,
say.
I just exactly. I get this feeling that Descartes he is the beginning of something. But again, it's like the wave doesn't really clap until we hit
Well, as a
bar.
mathematician, he was probably just as influential. It's the crazy thing. Like he invented the coordinate, he invented the x,
Yeah,
y, and I think maybe z
yeah,
axioms on the
yeah.
coordinates.
I mean, that's like an insanely genius
So I'm going to put him
legacy
in
to leave to
groundbreaking. I
mankind.
think he has to be in groundbreaking.
Okay.
I just
Yeah,
think
no, I
he
think
has
you're
to
right.
be. He didn't
You're
write as
right.
much as Kant did, but he's just that important.
You're right.
And the
He
writings he
definitely
did
is.
have, like they outweigh Kant's writings, like line by line.
Yeah, that's
Um,
that's a good point. That's a good point. He is groundbreaking.
okay, One of my personal favorites. I don't even know if this guy really is a philosopher. Um,
Yeah.
Michel de Montaigne.
Oh, yeah. Montaigne's not a philosopher.
He's not a philosopher. He has some he has a lot of opinions, but he's not really a philosopher.
Yeah, he's just like a guy with a blog, like a really good
Yeah,
blog.
he invented blogging is what he did,
Yeah.
and he actually invented humanism in a way because Shakespeare modeled his plays after Montaigne's essays,
Hmm.
or at least he did. Like he is known to regarded as doing that, but I don't know to what extent. But he was a fan of Montaigne's essays,
Yeah.
and if you read Montaigne, he sounds a lot like Shakespeare in a weird way. Like
Yeah, no,
his
I've
voice.
noticed
Yeah.
that a little bit. I think Shakespeare kind of like you were saying, is influenced by some of his concepts and ideas and just general worldview. But that does not a philosopher make. You know, he didn't.
That does not a
He
philosopher
knew
make. Yeah, and
he
also
knew tons of cool stories,
Montaigne
but
was kind of like a weird bigot. Like he was just kind of like funny. He was a comedian. Like
yeah,
he would. I read something recently at the library, at the BC library, and he said, which is a pretty
yeah.
good library, and he said, "Oh, you know, this they talk about this one nobleman about how he started learning Greek at the age of, in late age, and how he's so important. He represents so much. He learns Greek at 60. Well, you know what is learning Greek at 60 but a second form of childhood. So he was like ragging on this guy for like learning Greek and just being like, yeah, this guy's entering another era of childhood. And I'm like, all right.
Funny.
Montaigne,
Yeah, what
like
a
the most
hater.
Latined up, like prep boy ever. Like Montaigne was studying. He was like raised in a household where they spoke entirely Latin and they didn't speak any
Wow.
French. Yeah, and so he was
Jeez.
raised like in this environment where they only spoke Latin just to fuck with him and teach and make him become a weirdo. And of course, he's like when someone else tries to learn Greek, in like 60, he's like, oh, I'm going to scoff at that because I'm far I'm far above ever having to do anything like that ever. It's like, dude, you were like the shining darling for that kind of thing. Yeah. So Montaigne can be a
That's
bit of a
super
hypocrite,
funny.
and that's kind of why his works are so funny. But I
Wow.
I don't. He's not a philosopher. I mean, he's like Petrarch, right? He's sort of just like
Yeah,
a
he's not a philosopher. You don't have to be a philosopher to be an interesting and remarkable historical figure. And
I think in a
even
passing
even
kind of way, you could
you know,
argue he was philosophical, but it's just not like people
yeah,
definitely interpreted his works philosophically, but
yeah.
he's not a tried and true philosopher. He's not.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing. My opinion is that I think that a sufficiently great artist is basically doing implicit philosophy before its time. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean they're a philosopher. That's because that's not what a philosopher is. Like a
No,
philosopher is someone
philosophy
who
you have to be
makes the
explicit. Yeah, that's the trick.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah, exactly. I completely agree.
And speaking of
So
another
that's
one
what I
who
was
is
saying.
almost in this vein, although I think more a true
Yeah.
philosopher, Erasmus of Rotterdam.
Hmm. I
Really,
don't really
really a
know what
philologist.
Yeah, I know he's one of the big humanists, but I can't. Um, I don't know. Probably pretty influential, or at least good.
Well, Erasmus, he's a humorist, and yet he's also doing sharp, acerbic political commentary. Have you read Praise of Folly or anything by him?
I didn't know that was him. I read a little bit of that
That one's really good because
a long
he
time ago.
uses he talks he makes a character like this woman named Folly. He'll make a caricature
Yeah.
and describe her with all these sort of ugly qualities, and then he'll immediately tear down his picture of her and describe her as praiseworthy for having all these faults and
Hmm.
follies, right? And so he can like create a monstrosity and sort of invert it literarily into
Hmm.
something beautiful. And as a literary exercise, it was really remarkable. And for the guy who
Hmm.
created humanism or helped invent it or whatever in the North, in the Northern Renaissance, it's really
Hmm.
remarkable that he could write in such a stark and sort of plain toned and even toned way. He's kind of a
Hmm.
silver tongued writer. He was very famously friends with Thomas More, who became Sir Thomas More, and then he became Saint Thomas More. And
Wow.
but I think in some ways Erasmus is for sure the superior author. Thomas More can be
Yeah.
a little heavy handed and a little um, tyrannical.
Hmm.
But whether or not he's a philosopher, I think he's a moralizing semi theologian.
Yeah.
Um,
He's kind of a moralist, huh?
kind of a moralist. Yeah, he reminds me a little bit of like a C.S. Lewis.
Yeah. That's
Maybe with
interesting.
maybe a little bit more dignity, um, or a lot more. I don't know. I'll say obviously he can't be ranked. So, but I would say he's probably leaning more towards being a philosopher than a lot of these people. but again, it's in sort of this petty moralizing sense. It isn't in the same project really. It's secondary, the moralizing. As a moralist, are you there?
Yeah, I am.
Okay,
Sorry, this guy just is messaging me on
okay, okay.
this guy's messaging me on Steam.
Okay,
Apparently, our
we're almost
mutual.
done with the heavyweights. We have Rousseau, Judith Butler, Karl Marx, Socrates, Lacan,
Yeah.
Aristotle. We were almost done with the heavyweights. We could probably do four more.
All right, let's do four more because
All right,
I
let's
gotta
do
talk to this guy and
John
do
Locke.
some
What do you think
stuff.
of John Locke? Oh no, let's do Thomas More because we just mentioned Erasmus.
I like Thomas More, but I'm biased. I like his idea of utopia, but I don't. Again, I don't really think he's a
I think
philosopher,
he
is he?
could be because Plato had his Republic and Utopia is close. So
Yeah,
maybe we could say little influence or mediocre, and then for Erasmus we could say the same thing. Because no doubt that they would have had some sort of influence on philosophy. It's just like say on someone like Thomas Hobbes, but it's just a matter of like how likely is it to ink into the whole metaphysical epistemological debates.
yeah,
I think somewhere along the lines it kind of had to. So I would say little influence to mediocre because their influence on philosophy was comparatively weak, but their influence on
yeah,
literature was strong.
yeah. Also, your screen is sort of frozen on my Discord, by the way.
I wouldn't worry too much about it, man. I mean, I'm just trying to
Okay,
make sure the recording is still going.
okay, that's all that matters. All right.
I could stop sharing if you want.
Um, yeah, I guess so.
Okay. All right, we're still recording.
Okay, so three more.
Okay, we got almost 3 hours on this.
Yeah,
I was skipping Isaac Newton. Let's do.
yeah. Newton's not a philosopher.
Yeah, I'm just gonna throw him up and don't know, don't care. Um,
Yeah.
John. Let's do John Locke. His the one who had interchanges with him, his contemporary. John Locke.
John Locke, I immediately think social contract. Right? That's all I know though. Is that even right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the
The
social. It sounds like a movie, the Social Network. But yeah,
yeah, yeah.
did he? Yeah, did he? Is that was his term? Was that his coinage? Uh,
Maybe I'm
I know that he
I
was
might be
really into
totally wrong.
economics, and I know that the head of the mint was actually Isaac Newton. So
Weird.
more familiar. Maybe they became friendly while they were doing economical stuff. I don't know. John Locke did. Let's see. I'm
You know,
looking up.
I'm looking it up too, and I remember this actually. I had a philosophy of mind course years ago, and it says he was the first to define the self through a continuity of consciousness. And I think that's kind of wrong. It's like a weird mistake. I think. Like I feel like the self is not the same as its experiences.
So this is kind of who I thought like Max Stirner was like. But Max Stirner was way more disappointing. John Locke is kind of like the real deal. He's like a solipsist.
Uh
Um,
huh.
I think John Locke is sort of hinging on solipsism without
How?
really what?
How?
Because I think like you're saying he's placing way too much emphasis on conscious feedback and
Yeah.
and to me that's
Well, it's yeah.
sort of how a solipsist views things. Like, oh well, if I don't really care, then maybe it doesn't matter. you know,
Yeah. I mean, I think they had different motivations, but
it's
in
totally
both
different
cases,
motivations, but it
they're
ends
the
up being on
truth
the
with
same.
something critical. Yeah,
They
it's
end
the
up being
truth
at
with
the
something
same
critical taken out.
campfire.
Yeah, exactly. They're reaching a similar zone. I mean, namely, it's
Um,
just yeah,
but undeniably influential, right? I mean, he's influential, but it's like influential along lines I don't agree with strongly. I'll
yeah,
put him up there.
yeah.
Groundbreaking. Why not?
All right.
Was he is he the father of liberalism?
That sounds
That
pretty
sounds about
groundbreaking.
right. Sounds very liberal to me.
Hmm.
Okay, Jean Jacques Rousseau. I kind of like this guy a little more than John Locke.
So, other Enlightenment guy.
This is my John Locke.
Oh no, this is the social contract guy.
Yeah, that's what I was like. Why are you associating? You're misassociating here.
I know. I was wrong. Um, I don't know. I think he was like a bad guy, so I'm kind of against him. But
He was a bad. Why you say that?
he's like abandoned his family, didn't he?
He had a real.
Yeah,
He had like many different kids.
yeah.
I don't know if he. I think he probably abandoned them at one point. He just was so poor, dude. That's my understanding. Was he was just so
Okay.
poor. But I don't. Yeah, I don't know.
Jeez.
He was because
Damn.
he was like he would like go back and forth between like Paris and Geneva because he was from Geneva, and then he like
Yeah.
when Paris was like too much for him, he'd have to go to like Geneva again. And his family, I think, lived in Geneva a lot, and they were like poor, and he was poor. And then when he got really old, he kind of like left his family, or his wife died, and he was like he wrote a book where he would just walk about his reflections as he walked around as like an old man. Yeah, he was kind of he's kind of an enigma actually. Like there's not a lot of people really like him. Like Kant is kind of like John Locke, and John Locke's kind of like Descartes, and they're all kind of alike.
Yeah.
Rousseau is not really like those guys. He's a lot more of like a regretful. Like he seems like he just sort of has like mishaps left and right, bad luck.
Yeah. Interesting.
And yet at the same time, he's incredibly influential. And he was like, oh, I didn't realize this. He was also a composer. I forgot. I knew that
Wow.
at somewhere, but I forgot about it. And he did contribute
Weird.
to the encyclopedia, especially when it came to music. I think he wrote about music in the encyclopedia. He was the first person to do that.
Hmm.
Um, I do like Rousseau. His philosophy is it kind of veers towards anarchism,
Hmm.
right? Or communism maybe. It kind of his philosophy kind of is like anti-aristocratic,
Yeah.
and it's sort of anti-industry. He's like kind of seems almost like a luddite by implication. Um, I don't know. Do you think he cuts too far against the grain, or do you think he's sort of kind of more of a squared philosopher and deserves recognition?
Um. Yeah. I don't think he's that. I don't really think he's that out there. Actually, I think he may. I think he may bring more benefits than detriments, sort of. But I really don't know. Oh yeah, I actually remember this. I remember looking at these concepts, amour de soi and amour propre or whatever. Like he distinguished between good and evil self-love, which I think that he wasn't new in doing that, but I think Hegel references him at some point as well in kind of an intriguing way. So I think he was kind of
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know much about him, but I just remember those concepts seemed like again this kind of increased sense of subjectivity emerging, which is always a good thing. Again, I kind of was down on him for his personal life, but maybe that's not relevant.
My understanding was that he was a very like humble person, but
Yeah.
he was like too humble for his own good, and he's like tripped up by it. That was my understanding,
Hmm. Hmm.
and he's kind of tragic in a way because that book I read that where he was really old, he seemed kind of depressed. He's just like
Yeah.
it's called Reflections by a Solitary Walker or something,
Yeah. I want to read
or sort
that.
of Reflections of a Solitary Walker. It's good. It was good. It's not very long.
I
So
really
I
sort of
would
liked
say,
French.
in terms of the way that he influenced, maybe not like academicians, but the way he influences sort of like hippie culture and farmers and neoliberals and all that sort of junk. I think he's very influential, and he seems to do it. He seems to be more influential in the matters of lifestyle than he is
Yeah.
in matters of policy.
Hmm.
And I think that puts him as a good philosopher for me. I think he's sort of carved his own stretch.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Despite seeming like he kind of was like, like a middle class moralist and an everyman, it seems like he kind of actually is playing more to low lives, but in like a healthy kind of way with this whole noble savage doctrine.
Yeah.
Okay. So we did him. Service, I guess. We have Lacan. Okay, who do you want to do? I mean, we can call this the last one.
Um, I don't know. I can't see who's left on the chart.
Well, that's right.
Um,
We could do Machiavelli.
yeah.
Oh wait, we already did Thomas Hobbes. Who is that person that we did? This is Thomas Hobbes. Who is that other person? Oh, is that Francis Bacon? That was Francis Bacon. Shit.
Hmm.
Okay, well, let's do Francis Bacon real quick.
All right. Like I was sort of mentioning before, my quick read on Francis Bacon is that he basically introduced what today we would call cognitive fallacies, or he was the first to really kind of write about them rigorously, that is mistakes that we make when trying to make sense of the world. And I think that's it almost seems ahead of its time. And I think that's kind of one of the pieces of kindling which becomes ignited uh, later and leads to this like revolution in self consciousness. Um, and I think it sort of begins with him. He's a bit too scientific, just because that was his temperament or whatever. But I still think that there's like we haven't even fully gotten to like if everyone were to learn about cognitive biases and really like internalize them, the world would get a lot better. So it's like cool that he was writing about that in like the 1600s or something. So I like him. I think, although knowledge is power is a bit brutal. I think, or not even brutal, like devilish.
Yeah, he was kind of a very he's they called him the trumpeter of the scientific revolution, which isn't inaccurate. I think he really was a squared up guy. Like he kind of knew boundaries and it really really well, and he didn't try to be too political. And
Yeah,
he kind of did the sort of the lame the lame duck thing where he just sort of talked about science. Um,
yeah,
However, he kind of invented that. He kind of invented the science expositor sort of job. Um,
yeah,
and like you said, he was interested in cognitive fallacies, which isn't a bad thing to be interested in by any means, and it's squarely philosophical. It's
yeah.
sort of underwhelming and dim in intention. Um, yeah, I think he is good.
Mm. Yeah, I agree.
Maybe influential to multiple schools, but not really. I think he was sort of
Well, not as a philosopher exactly. I think certainly in science, but maybe not so much in philosophy.
he was just like a prophet. Like he could see that where the science was going to take over the whole world, and he was just sort of
Yeah,
embracing it. Before
yeah,
anyone else. So now we have Spinoza as a possibility, Freud, Derrida, Lacan, Saint Augustine.
well,
Um,
I love Augustine. He's a good one. I
that's
mean,
it.
but are we gonna do any more? Or
Well, I think we have. I mean, we should save some good ones, I guess.
yeah,
Okay, let's count. Let's just count how much there are. How much was it? 12 across?
yeah, one, two,
24, 36, 48, 60,
jeez,
and almost about 70 left. Maybe
damn,
69, 68. How much do we have we done? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42. So there's about 26 or 25 that can just kind of be thrown out or not thrown out, but that's the remainder. That's
yeah,
the difference. So I would
hmm.
say we can just find the ones that aren't really philosophers and then just throw them out immediately.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
oh, some of these are ancient Greek ones that we have to do reverse image search for, which is
Yeah, I know.
Uh,
Well, and there, of course, there's some moderns who we have
okay,
to
we
give
have
a list of
John
first.
Knox,
So.
the Scottish theologian. Pretty sure he's
Okay,
not a
that's
philosopher. He just
ridiculous.
basically enhanced Calvin. He re-promoted Calvinism. I wouldn't call that really
Yeah,
philosophy. Um, only in a fringe sense. We
yeah,
have Aquinas somewhere. No, he counts.
yeah. Aquinas definitely counts.
Wittgenstein, I can do
He's a
that quickly
philosopher.
at least. I think Wittgenstein was kind of an anti-philosopher that used philosophical tools um,
Yeah,
to make his mark. I think
yeah,
he really didn't believe in philosophy at the end, and he sort of was represented the death knell of a tradition that kind of started to veer off with Bertrand Russell, and it sort of was finished off with Wittgenstein.
yeah, yeah,
He was kind of the last philosophical celebrity. Very interesting life, of course. We don't have to delve into it, but very, very interesting life and upbringing. Extremely eccentric, possibly autistic, very depressed individual, angry at times. He was
yeah.
suicidal. The story is he had three brothers that were they killed themselves, and he was an Austrian aristocrat, and he almost killed himself.
Jeez.
And then he became a pupil randomly of Bertrand Russell, and Bertrand Russell liked him a lot as a pupil, but then or a disciple or whatever. And then they had fallings out, many fallings out. Anyway, I don't even know if he outlived Russell. I don't think he did. I don't think he outlived Russell. Anyway, I would say he's
Wow.
little influence or mediocre,
Dang.
if not bad.
Yeah.
He's sort of a nihilist. But
Yeah.
he's so autistic that it's hard to pick up on that. Um,
That's funny.
do.
All
Karl
right.
Marx.
I gotta.
You
I
gotta go.
gotta. I. Yeah.
You got to fly. Okay. Yeah. There's not a lot that we can just discount immediately.
I know we got
Uh,
some big guys left. I mean, I think we can do a part two, don't you?
yeah, we're gonna have to do a lot of reverse image search on these, though. I know the names are going to
Yeah.
be relatively easy, but these faces
Yeah.
are not familiar. Anyway,
Yeah.
there's even a Turkish guy.
Hmm,
Anyway, um,
weird.
okay, let's leave it there. I'm gonna stop. What time is it? We did three. We
10.
did 3 hours almost exactly.
Dang.
All right, signing off.
True devotion.
Too much time.
All right.
All right, take care, Will. God bless.
All right. You too. Bye.